Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If. This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku became the Dragon King. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. A young woman crouched before a group of 5 small children and asked if they were excited to learn their quirks. The children nodded eagerly. In the middle of the group sat a green-haired boy with an innocent, hopeful smile. His name was Izuku. He had been left at the orphanage 4 years earlier by an unknown person, and today he and 4 other children would reach the age at which quirks were tested. The caretaker opened the back door of the car and told them to sit down and not fight. The 5 children rushed into the vehicle, and after everyone settled they drove to the hospital for the quirk assessments. Izuku quietly hoped for a powerful quirk like the number 1 hero, All Might. The other children voiced similar wishes, imagining bragging rights or a future as strong heroes. After a short drive they arrived at the hospital. The caretaker opened the door for them with a bright smile. She locked the car and led the children to the reception desk, where she told the receptionist she had an appointment and produced proof. Once they were cleared, the group walked to the examination room and found several other children waiting in the hallway. Some looked nervous, others excited. After a half-hour of waiting, the caretaker led the group of 5 into the doctor's office. The doctor, who had been reading a report, put it down and smiled as he gestured for them to take seats. He greeted the caretaker and confirmed she was there to have the 5 children's quirks evaluated. He then asked which child would like to go first. One of the children eagerly volunteered. The doctor explained he would need a small blood sample, and the caretaker placed a comforting hand on the child's shoulder to calm him. One by one, the doctor collected blood samples from all 5 children, then excused himself and walked to another room with the samples. After 8 minutes, he returned carrying several reports and wearing a serious expression. The doctor sat and announced that all of the children had quirks except for one. The caretaker's expression shifted from calm to annoyance and then to something colder before she forced her face back to neutral. She asked the doctor which child was the exception. Privately, she thought that one of the children must be useless and that when she discovered who it was she would cast the child out. She did not want a quirkless child around her. The doctor named the green-haired child, Izuku, as the one without a quirk. Izuku froze. The other children and the caretaker turned to look at him. Even though the caretaker tried to hide it, Izuku could see the flicker of disgust in her eyes. The other children began to laugh and hurl insults. Izuku said nothing. He looked down, wide-eyed, tears gathering. He already understood what being quirkless meant in their society. At only 4 years old, he was unusually perceptive and had watched heroes and other children use quirks every day, praying that one would manifest for him. The announcement felt like a harsh, undeniable truth. They returned to the car. The other 4 children chatted excitedly about their quirks, bouncing with energy as if Izuku had been forgotten. The sharpest pain for Izuku came from the caretaker's look. Having no family, he had always seen her as a mother who would protect him. Now the protectiveness he had trusted vanished into a cold glare as she sat in the driver's seat. He clung to a small, quiet hope despite the change around him. After arriving at the orphanage, the caretaker ordered the children out. When Izuku began to climb from the car, the caretaker stopped him and instructed him to stay because they had to go somewhere else. Izuku sat in the seat, confused, trying to recall where he had to go but coming up with nothing. His confusion turned to dread when he realized they were stopping in front of a forest. Before he could react, the caretaker used her mid-level telekinesis to lift him roughly and cast him into the trees. He struck a tree hard and felt a sudden, searing pain. Dark spots clouded his vision and dizziness washed over him, but he forced himself to stay awake and cried out through his tears. In desperation he called out the caretaker's name, Miss Yon, but his voice faded as he lost consciousness. He saw the caretaker spit at him from a distance before she got into the car and drove away. When he came to, he groaned and clutched his head, trying to piece together his surroundings. The memory of being abandoned in the forest returned in a rush, and tears streamed down his face. He could not believe the woman he had trusted had left him there because he was quirkless. Pain and anger roiled inside him as he steadied himself against a tree. His stomach growled. He pressed a hand to his belly and pushed forward into the forest to look for food, hoping there was still time before sunset. A few minutes later he found a small pond and hurried toward it, but exhaustion and his injuries made him collapse and fall into the shallow water. He did not drown. He washed as best he could, then drank from the clear water to soothe his thirst and let out a quiet, relieved breath. He sat up and acknowledged that he was still hungry. He rose, searched the underbrush, and found familiar berries. He gathered them, cleaned them, and ate until his hunger eased. Feeling steadier, he set out to find shelter. Not far from the pond he discovered a cave and entered cautiously, carrying a stick in case of danger. Even though he tried to be brave, he was still almost 5 years old. The cave grew dark and his eyesight narrowed, but he gripped the stick and pressed on. After a short walk, he reached a clean dead end with no signs of animals and breathed a sigh of relief. He stepped back outside to collect dry leaves and a pair of stones for making a fire. Luck turned when a wolf appeared and fixed its eyes on him. Izuku froze as the animal advanced with a low growl. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead while his heart raced. His mind scrambled for an escape but found none. When the wolf closed the distance, he forced himself out of his frozen state and prepared to defend himself. The wolf lunged. He dodged but lost his footing and nearly fell. He managed to parry with his stick, which splintered under the force. Using what remained of the stick, he struck the wolf, drawing a sharp howl. He scrambled for a heavy stone, and when the wolf rushed him again he swung and struck its leg, causing it to stumble. The wolf staggered and then backed away, shaken. Izuku stood trembling, his shoulder bruised from where he had been grazed, breathing hard and clenching his teeth to hold back a cry. He steadied himself and watched until the wolf had retreated into the trees. Izuku looked up and saw the wolf rushing at him again. Pain held him back from dodging. The animal struck his chest and he collapsed, clutching his side. The wolf snarled and advanced while Izuku lay with tears in his eyes. He had not been ready to die. He wanted to live, to prove to his former caretaker that he was not useless, to enjoy life and become a hero. As the wolf drew closer, his heartbeat raced and fear tightened his chest. He shut his eyes, bracing for the end. When nothing happened, he opened one eye in confusion and saw the wolf slowed and suspended in midair. A screen appeared out of nowhere. The screen notified him that all conditions had been met and that the dragon system was activating. The system announced that the dragon system had been activated and congratulated him on becoming its player. Izuku's eyes widened as he read the messages. He wondered whether the condition for unlocking the system had been a life-or-death situation. He felt bewildered and angry at his quirk, but relieved that he was not quirkless. He suspected the new power had something to do with dragons. The system then alerted him that his race would change from human to dragon. A fearful thought crossed his mind that he might be trapped in dragon form forever. Dark red energy enveloped him and a cocoon formed. After a few minutes the cocoon burst, releasing energy in a violent flare. The blast sent the wolf crashing into the cave wall with tremendous force, and the animal slumped unconscious. Izuku opened his eyes and found himself standing, unharmed. He was taller than before and his hair and eyes had turned red. He felt strangely refreshed and stretched. He searched the cave and found the wolf lying on the ground. He picked up the stone he had used earlier with far greater ease and approached cautiously. He kicked the animal twice to check responsiveness and received no reaction, but noticing shallow breaths he realized the wolf was still alive. He struck it with the stone hard enough to render it unresponsive. The wolf lay still. Satisfied, Izuku discarded the stone and walked to the pond to examine himself. He sat against a tree and studied the changes in his body. He tested the idea of speaking a command aloud, but nothing happened. Then he tried a game-like command in his mind and a large status window appeared. The system displayed his information: name Izuku, race low-class dragon, level 10, HP 500-500, MP 300-300, STR 10, AGI 10, Indi 10, VIT 10, INT 10, SN 10, AP. He reminded himself he was effectively at starting level, but he was only 4 years old and had over 11 years before applying to UA. Hunger and the approaching night prompted him to drag the wolf into the cave and settle in for the night. Morning light roused him. He realized he was not in his orphanage room. Memories of the previous day played back and he clenched his fist, thinking bitterly of the woman who had mistreated him. He walked to the pond to wash and prepare for training. He attempted push-ups but managed only 3 before collapsing from the strain. A system notification created a daily physical training quest with specific requirements: 10 push-ups, 15 sit-ups, 15 squats, and a 2-kilometer run, with penalties for failure and gradually increasing demands. Izuku looked at the quest window with determination, believing the system would reward his efforts. He pushed through the exercises until exhaustion left him sitting by the pond. When he opened the quest rewards panel, it listed 2 items. The first was 2 stat points, and the second entry was empty. A small gift box appeared in front of Izuku after he accepted both options. He opened it and found a small iron sword inside. A smile brightened his face as his eyes shone. He carefully swung the sword once before placing it on the ground. The sword's description showed it was an iron small sword that granted a modest increase to strength and attack when equipped. Izuku decided to store it in his inventory for now. The inventory had been empty until then. He told himself he was hungry but relieved to have leftovers from the day before that would suffice. After allocating points into his stats, Izuku reviewed how things had changed. It had been around 2 months since he had been abandoned here, but instead of giving in to despair, he had started to make the situation work for him. He had become proficient at hunting, an essential skill in a forest where unfamiliar fruits could be dangerous. His status read: Name Izuku, race low-level dragon, level 10, HP 1250 of 1250, MP 750 of 750, STR 35, AGI 26, END 26, VIT 25, INT 25, SN 25. AP. He had focused mainly on strength because, as a dragon, raw power suited his role even if his speed was not exceptional. Endurance and vitality were also important for a heavier, tank-style fighter. He kept other stats reasonably balanced to support a variety of situations. Izuku discovered a new feature of his quirk. He could create an instant dungeon to fight monsters and level up. He did not want to try it immediately for several reasons. He planned to enter the dungeon when he turned 5, which meant he had about 6 months to prepare. He intended to use that time to hone stealth and hunting skills in the forest and to find his way back to the city to visit the library and continue learning, since information mattered in the world. He washed up, dressed in the clothes he had obtained from the random item box, and set off at full speed toward the place where he had first been left in the forest. Soon he found the old spot and picked up a road that led out toward the city. After running for about 35 minutes, he arrived at a bustling urban area. Tall buildings everywhere, roads full of vehicles, people talking, and a few pro-heroes patrolling the streets. Izuku searched for a public library and eventually found a large one. When he entered, a woman behind the reception looked up and smiled. She stood and approached him, crouching down to his level to ask his name. Izuku introduced himself. The librarian complimented his name and asked if he was there to read. He nodded. When she asked where his parents were, Izuku flinched and looked down. The woman understood and hugged him, expressing sympathy and asking if he had anyone else to care for him. He nodded, and she smiled before offering to help him find suitable books. Izuku requested educational books appropriate for a second-grade student and explained that he was advanced for his age, demonstrating his knowledge when the librarian asked him a few questions. With a stack of books, he sat and read through the afternoon, pausing to eat several berries from his inventory to stave off hunger. The librarian was impressed by his dedication and concentration. Around 4:30 p.m., Izuku left the library after promising to return regularly. He ran back toward his cave, continuing his journey of survival and self-improvement. 8 months of training later, Izuku finished his last set of push-ups and sat with his back against a tree, satisfied with his progress. His status had improved dramatically. Name Izuku, race low-level dragon, level 10, HP 4250 of 4250, MP 2400 of 2400, STR 100, AGI 85, ND 90, VIT 85, INT 80, SEN 82. He had grown skilled in stealth and hunting and felt ready to enter the dungeon provided by his system. After cleaning up and dressing, Izuku activated the system to create an instant dungeon called Zombie City. The ground cracked and a blue portal opened, electricity flickering around its edges. The system confirmed that instant dungeon, Zombie City, had been successfully created. A screen hovered briefly over the portal as Izuku readied the small sword he had kept for months and stepped through with a determined expression. The portal closed behind him. He found himself standing on a rain-slick road amid ruined buildings and rusted cars. The cityscape looked abandoned and desolate under the light rain. As he walked forward, Izuku soon spotted two shambling figures searching the area for anything they could find. They moved with slow, unnatural motions, but the scene felt like something from an action sequence in an animated show rather than a gruesome horror. Izuku readied his sword and moved with practiced stealth. The ensuing confrontation played out in quick, stylized motion, swift strikes, agile dodges, and sparks flying as the small sword met its targets. The fight stayed fast and clean, like a choreographed battle in an animated scene, and Izuku emerged unscathed and more confident than before. Izuku smirked as he took a bow from his inventory. He had obtained it from a random item box and found it useful for hunting. Short on arrows, he fashioned them from wood and stone and stored extras in his inventory. He notched an arrow and aimed at a lone zombie that stood growling and motionless. The arrow sliced through the air and struck the zombie cleanly. The creature staggered and collapsed, neutralized before it could react. A system notification confirmed that he had leveled up. Izuku noted that his displayed level was modest compared to his stats and reminded himself not to underestimate the dungeon foes. He loosed another arrow and the second zombie was brought down in a similar swift motion. After hours of fighting, Izuku sat down to catch his breath. He had been clearing the dungeon continuously for 3 hours and felt physically exhausted. His sword showed heavy wear after he had defeated around 200 zombies, and he had leveled up 9 times during the run. As he pushed deeper into the city section of the dungeon, he had begun encountering armored enemies and those with long-range attacks, so he decided it was wise to stop for the day. Izuku opened a portal and returned to the surface. It was afternoon, which confirmed for him that time flowed the same in both places. He decided not to visit the library that day and headed toward his cave for an afternoon meal and rest. At the library, Izuku thanked the librarian, Sonia, for letting him rent a book. Sonia smiled and typed something on her computer, expressing that she was glad he was so dedicated. Izuku replied that information and education were important, and Sonia asked what he intended to study that day. He considered briefly and then said he planned to look for more books on karate to further his practice. Sonia encouraged him to enjoy his time, and he nodded before setting off to find the book he needed. It had been a year. Izuku was almost 7 years old, though his dragon heritage made him taller than other children his age, so he often looked older. He had grown closer to Sonia, the librarian he had visited for 2 years. Over the past 2 years he had become much stronger, learning boxing and now studying karate. Without an instructor it had been difficult to master the art, but the books and occasional observation of nearby martial arts classes had helped him improve. He had completed education up to Class 7 and was on a month-long break, spending that time on training before starting Class 8. He had visited his former orphanage and seen his former caretaker caring for children. The sight had angered him at first, but he calmed himself and reminded himself that he would get his revenge in time. He had used money from the system's store to buy some items and, with sharp senses and growing strength, he was beginning to rival a mid-level adult hero. These changes had left him colder, more confident, and prideful habits born of being deprived of proper affection and of his dragon nature. Sonia remained the only person he trusted as a friend. As he walked home, a system notification appeared on his display telling him he had reached the required level to evolve. He had received the prompt the day before after reaching level 50 but had deferred it to rest a few days. Now, standing before his cave, he chose to proceed with the evolution. Dark red energy swirled around him and coalesced into a sphere. After a tense interval, cracks formed and the sphere shattered like glass before vanishing. Izuku felt a surge of power and opened his eyes to a stronger, taller version of himself. He tested his new strength by punching a nearby tree. The impact sent the tree splintering and falling in an exaggerated, dramatic burst rather than anything gruesome. A system notification announced his ascension to the rank of middle-class dragon, with a 10-point boost to all stats and an increase in his base strength. He also gained access to a partial dragon transformation. Izuku was surprised and thrilled to learn that he could now transform parts of his body into draconic forms. He stepped into a clearing, closed his eyes, and concentrated on his back. He felt a pressure and then heard the sound of wings unfurling. Opening his eyes, he saw large red draconic wings sprout from his back and felt exhilaration at the new ability. Izuku shouted that he had wings and could fly, then flapped his wings and a strong gust of wind launched him upward into the air. Izuku's eyes sparkled with amazement as he learned to control his wings. He now had an extra pair of limbs. He tested their strength and was surprised when a single scratch on a stone shattered it. The stone's surface then restored itself thanks to the regeneration skill he had acquired 7 months earlier. He experimented further and transformed his hand into a dragon's limb. Scales spread over it and a very tough red hide formed. The hand grew larger and more muscular. He tried to do the same with his legs, but a tail appeared instead. He tested the tail in several ways and tried once more to convert his legs, but discovered a current limit to how much of his body he could transform into a dragon at once. Izuku smirked as he sat on a long tree branch watching the sunset and told himself that this was only the start. Sonia asked with concern where Izuku had been, noting that she had not seen him for the past week. Izuku smiled, pleased that someone in the world cared about him, and he sat with Sonia having lunch at a nearby cafe. He reassured her that there was no need to worry and that he had simply been busy. Sonia regarded him with suspicion and asked what had kept him so occupied. Izuku explained that he had been completing a task given by his quirk, and Sonia nodded. He had already told Sonia about his gamer quirk and about living in the forest. When he first revealed this, she had reacted strongly and immediately wanted him to come to her house. Izuku refused because he now loved the forest as his home and did not want to leave. He went on to explain how he had ended up there and how he obtained his quirk. Sonia became furious and demanded justice against his former caretaker, but Izuku calmed her by saying he had already moved on and would deal with the situation later. After reassuring Sonia for about 3 hours, she agreed to let him continue his daily life, but she insisted that he stay in contact. Izuku complied and, at her urging, had gotten a phone that day so she could reach him. It had been 3 years since he became a middle-class dragon. He was currently level 131 with a pending evolution, and he planned to start the next evolution once he reached home. Over the past 3 years he had grown very strong, improving not only his physical capabilities but also his skills. He had mastered 4 different martial arts and become proficient with both bow and sword, making him effective at close and long range. He kept detailed notes on the quirks of pro heroes and their weaknesses, which sharpened his analytical approach to battle's information, and exploiting an opponent's weakness were key to increasing his chances of winning. Despite being only 9 years old, Izuku was already stronger than some high-level pro heroes, and he took quiet pride in that fact. He remained cold and reserved by nature. He had not contacted Sonia for a week because he had gone on a long grinding mission that earned him 11 points after crossing level 100. During that time his phone had been out of service, which had understandably worried Sonia. As they prepared to part, Sonia told him to take care and to call before he slept. Izuku nodded and smiled. Sonia ruffled his hair and gave him a warm, affectionate pat on the head. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. Izuku ran full speed toward his house, excited for his upcoming evolution. He expected to become a high-class dragon after this change and could not wait to see what new abilities would appear. As soon as he got home he opened his window and confirmed the evolution without hesitation. The atmosphere around him tensed and darkened. Red lightning crackled and a surge of dark red energy erupted, surrounding Izuku until his vision dimmed. The energy formed a sphere that emitted a powerful aura, causing nearby animals to flee the area. After a long wait of 12 hours, a single crack opened in the sphere, and many more followed until the ball split like glass and its fragments dissolved in midair. In the center stood a very large dragon with red scales. A system notification announced that he had ascended to the rank of high-class dragon, that all of his stats had been boosted by 15 points, and that his strength had increased dramatically. The notification also stated that he could now access the complete dragon transformation and that 119 levels remained to the next ascent. The dragon looked up at the sky and let out a roar that made the surrounding area tremble. Izuku examined his body in surprise and realized he had fully become a dragon. He was stunned to find himself a complete dragon. His voice had deepened and now sounded strong and intimidating. Night had fallen, but he did not care. He wanted to enjoy his new form. He launched into the sky on huge red wings that were even bigger and more powerful than before, and he felt genuine joy as he flew. Sonia grabbed Izuku's shoulder and asked with concern if he was all right. Izuku looked confused for a moment before remembering the morning news. He had been careless the previous night, flying too close to the city and being photographed. Izuku reassured Sonia that there was no need to worry and that the dragon people had seen had been him in his true form. Sonia's eyes widened in disbelief. Izuku chuckled at her reaction and repeated that the dragon had been him. Sonia blinked, shook him lightly, and demanded why he had not told her sooner. Izuku apologized and explained that he had only discovered it himself the day before. Sonia sighed and warned him not to be careless. She told him the police had sent a small team to check the forest and that they would be exploring the area. She offered for him to stay with her for a few days, but Izuku declined. He assured her that he could hide well and accepted that he had been careless. Sonia gave him a slightly angry look, sighed again, and told him to continue his reading session. Izuku nodded and walked away. Izuku found the investigators annoying as he watched 3 policemen and 1 hero conducting their search. It had been 3 days since the investigation began, and he resented being forced to stay hidden in his own home. When the team finally moved away, he felt relief. He followed them stealthily from branch to branch until they reached the main road and drove off, which suggested the investigation was closing. He pumped a fist in quiet triumph and returned to his cave to continue his training. He had also stopped receiving the daily quest and now relied solely on dungeons and other missions to gain stat points. Izuku had expected something like this when he grew stronger. The daily 3 stat points for simple physical exercise had always felt too generous. Still, he continued the training to keep his body at its peak. After exercising, he cleaned up, dressed, checked the news on his phone, only the usual reports on heroes and villains, and then set out toward the main road with the intention of walking for an hour. The walk brought him to the park where he had played as a child at the orphanage. Things had changed since then. He was no longer dependent on anyone and had built walls that made trust difficult. When he was not with Sonia, a cold aura kept others at bay and frightened most of the children who tried to approach him. He sat alone on a swing and watched a young green-haired girl and an ash-blonde boy the same age as him playing together and using their quirks. Their mother sat on a nearby bench watching them. The mother, Inko, told her daughter Izumi that it was time to go home. The daughter nodded and walked toward her. Another mother called to her son Katsuki, who grumbled but followed. Seeing the happy family brought a brief flash of sadness to Izuku's eyes before his usual guarded expression returned. He dismissed the thought of having a family. He believed he could live independently. He stood, looked at the sunset, clenched his fist, and felt renewed determination. Everything had been taken from him. He had no friends except Sonia and no family, but he still held his dream of becoming a hero and graduating from UA, and he resolved to achieve it. Later, Izuku placed a pile of items on the supermarket counter and asked the cashier to ring them up. The store was one of the largest in the city, and he had come to pick up necessities. A sudden loud bang sent the customers into a panic. Izuku's senses heightened instantly as his mind raced, and he scanned the surroundings. A man in a black suit and mask entered wielding a gun and fired warning shots to control the crowd, then shouted orders for everyone to raise their hands and sit on the floor. Most people complied after the warning shots. Izuku sat and calmly analyzed the situation. There were 3 robbers, each carrying a pistol. None had used a quirk yet, so their abilities were unknown, and their behavior clearly marked the event as a robbery. The leader announced that no one should move or contact anyone or they would be in danger. The store fell into a tense, Controlled silence as Izuku weighed his options. One of the robbers shouted for everyone to move, and the crowd complied with fearful nods. Two of the men dashed toward the counter while the third lingered nearby. Izuku sighed and activated the telekinesis he had unlocked 2 years earlier, freezing the robber in place. He rose as everyone turned to look at him. Before anyone could react, Izuku pressed a finger to his lips to signal silence. He approached the immobilized robber, took the gun from his hand, rendered him unconscious, and laid him on the floor. He glanced at the other two, who were so focused on looting that they had not yet noticed their companion down. Izuku demanded that they surrender and stop using force. Both men looked back and realized they were facing a child. One of the robbers sneered at Izuku while the other raised his gun and threatened him. Izuku used his telekinesis to tear the weapon apart, reducing it to useless fragments. Enraged, one of the men activated a transformation quirk that turned his arm into a blade. Izuku noted mentally that a transformation quirk meant he needed to keep his distance. He used telekinesis to hurl the attacking man into his partner and sent them both crashing into the wall with an impact like an over-the-top anime move. Both robbers were knocked unconscious and a large dent marked the wall. Izuku gave a brief nod to the stunned customers. They rose immediately and expressed their gratitude. The police arrived within minutes, took the 3 robbers into custody, and questioned both the store owner and Izuku. The officers praised Izuku but advised him to be careful in the future. He accepted their warning without argument and left with the items the owner gave him in thanks. Izuku walked back into the forest. It had been 3 years since he had attained the high-class dragon rank, and he was only 2 levels away from ascending to a new rank. His status read, Izuku. Race, high-class dragon. Level, 248. HP, 570,525, 570,525. MP, 472,210, 472,210. STR, 393. AGI, 345. END, 390. VIT, 376. INT, 354. SEN, 343. He smirked as he reviewed his stats. 8 years of hard work had brought him this power. He was confident that no one but All Might stood a chance against him, and even then it would be nearly impossible. After storing his important items in his inventory and changing into a simple red shirt and black jeans, Izuku left the forest and booked a cab to Sonya's house. Sonya had invited him to dinner, and he had accepted. She was persistent and he knew she would not stop asking otherwise. At 12 years old, Izuku already looked like an older teen, tall and striking. He drew many glances because of his handsome face, but his cold aura made him seem unapproachable. Sonya had tried to soften his demeanor, but Izuku remained guarded, careful about whom he trusted. Sonya was the only person he trusted completely. They had discussed his dream of attending UA, and Sonya had pointed out that, without a legal guardian or a permanent home, the authorities would likely intervene. She suggested that he live with her to avoid that outcome. Izuku agreed that she was right and, after a brief exchange, accepted her offer to be his guardian. Sonya was a young widow who had lost her husband years earlier in a villain attack. She had no children, and when she learned of Izuku's circumstances, she sincerely hoped he would accept her proposal. Izuku told Sonya that she would be his guardian from now on. Sonya nodded, tears forming in her eyes, and embraced him with maternal warmth. Izuku returned the brief, comforting embrace. They ate dinner together and talked about many things. After the meal, Izuku left to gather his belongings so he could move in the next morning. The following day he placed his items in his inventory, took a final look at his former home, and gave a small salute before leaving. At Sonya's house, Izuku rang the bell. Sonya opened the door, greeted him, and invited him inside. She showed him around the house, guided him to the room where he would live, and gave him a brief tour. Sonya told him to rest for the day and explained that they would visit the government office the next day to update his records and take care of the necessary paperwork. Izuku nodded and walked back to his room. He noted that it was going to be a long day as he began placing his belongings in the new space. Sonya asked if he was ready. Izuku nodded again and stood, dressed in a black hoodie and black pants. Sonia led him out, locked the house, and they got into her car. Izuku said they would need to go to the police station first, and Sonia started driving toward the Muzutafu police station. After a few minutes they arrived and parked, then went inside to speak with the officer at the front desk. The officer told them they would have to wait about 15 minutes because the detective was occupied with a case. Sonia thanked him and sat with Izuku on a nearby couch. After about 10 minutes, a tall man with short black hair wearing an overcoat and a hat entered the station accompanied by 2 other officers and went into his office. The front desk officer gestured for Sonia to go to that office, so Sonia and Izuku stood and walked over. Sonia knocked respectfully and entered when a voice from inside gave permission. Sonia greeted the detective, and the man returned the greeting. He introduced himself as Naomasa Tsukachi, a captain and detective of the police force, and invited them to sit across from him. He asked why they had come to speak with him, and Sonia explained that she had brought Izuku to talk about his situation. The detective glanced at Izuku and then asked Sonia to continue. Sonia described what Izuku had told her, how he had been abandoned in a forest and left to die, how he had somehow survived and had been living there for 8 years. As she spoke, the detective's expression shifted through anger, concern, and disbelief. Izuku remained composed, watching the detective closely. When Sonia finished, the detective sent an officer to check the records to see whether a missing person report had been filed about a green-haired, quirkless boy named Izuku 8 years earlier. The detective then asked Izuku if he would share his side of the story. Izuku agreed and related his version of events, omitting some details and clarifying that his ability was draconic in nature, not related to gaming or telekinesis. As the detective listened, his face registered horror and disbelief. He found it hard to accept that someone would abandon a 4-year-old in a forest simply because of a quirk, and that the child had managed to survive alone for 8 years. The detective trusted the core of Izuku's account because he possessed a quirk that allowed him to discern truth from falsehood. A few moments later, the officer returned with a missing person file that matched Izuku's details. The file showed that Izuku had been declared dead after a 2-week investigation. The caretaker had reported that attackers had assaulted her during a car ride and abducted Izuku, and she had claimed to have barely escaped. The record contradicted Izuku's memory. Izuku clenched his fist when he read the false statement attributed to the caretaker. Sonia noticed and placed a calming hand on his shoulder, which helped him take a steadying breath. The detective explained that, after recording both statements and verifying the details, the police would open a new case. They planned to bring the caretaker in for questioning and present the findings to the judiciary. The detective told them they could go home and that they would be kept updated regarding the case, and both of them nodded. Sonia asked about the changes, and the detective explained that Izuku's records would be updated and that if she wanted to adopt him she could complete the paperwork at the government office. Sonia thanked the detective, and Izuku gave a quiet nod as they left the police station. The detective watched Izuku's retreating figure and observed that the boy had endured many hardships but knew how to hide them well. Sonia declared that Izuku would officially take the name Izuku Shernon and hugged him warmly. She realized she had been a bit too forceful and apologized. Izuku waved it off. Sonia suggested they go to a cafe to celebrate, and they shared a bright moment together over lunch. After lunch, Izuku and his new mother, Sonia, got into the car to drive home. Their ride was interrupted when a large villain began causing destruction in the middle of the city and the pro-heroes were struggling to stop him. Izuku's body tensed and his senses heightened as he assessed the situation. The villain tore a chunk from a nearby building and threw it toward their direction. Sonia's eyes widened and she turned instinctively to protect Izuku, but he was already gone. Sonia saw Izuku standing on the roof of their car. He leapt into the air and landed on a small nearby building, using his telekinetic quirk to hold the massive debris suspended. Crowds watched in amazement as the young boy defended them. Izuku's eyes flashed an intense red as he sent the debris back toward the villain, striking him and leaving him stunned. The pro-heroes seized the opportunity to subdue and capture the villain. With the immediate danger over, Izuku returned to the car. As he landed, the sound of applause rose around him. People praised his actions, and Izuku smiled. He walked toward his mother, who stood outside the car with a stern expression. When he reached her, Sonia scolded him by twisting his ear until he yelped. She told him that, heroic as his action had been, he should not scare her like that. Afterward she hugged him, ruffled his hair, and praised his bravery, which made him very happy. Their departure was halted by Death Arm, one of the pro-heroes who had been on the scene. Death Arm told them that, despite the heroism, Izuku had committed vigilantism by using his quirk without a license. Sonia argued that Izuku had saved many people and that it was his first time doing something like that. Death Arm insisted he could not ignore the behavior because it might encourage reckless actions later, and he closed in on Sonia in a way that made her uncomfortable. Izuku's eyes took on a dangerous glow as he seized the hero's attention by grabbing his shoulder. When Death Arm spoke to Sonia, Izuku reacted by pulling the hero down hard. In an intense, anime-style display of power, Izuku slammed Death Arm into the ground with a shockwave of force that left a crater in the pavement. He held the hero's gaze, and Death Arm flinched when confronted by Izuku's fierce, draconic stare. Izuku warned the hero to stay away from his mother, then threw him against a nearby wall. Once his emotions steadied, his eyes returned to normal. Izuku told his mother they should go, and Sonia nodded. As they left, she asked him why he had reacted so strongly. Izuku admitted shyly that the hero had made her uncomfortable. Sonia glanced at him, giggled at his shy expression, and thanked him for looking out for her. That evening the news cycles were dominated by the story of Izuku saving many people with his quirk and confronting the pro-hero Death Arm detective Tsukachi called to discuss the matter, and Sonia explained Izuku's reasons for intervening. Reporters reflected on the incident and noted that Death Arm's behavior had damaged his reputation. Izuku allowed himself a small, satisfied smile as he watched the reports, then headed to the kitchen and told his mother he would be going on a dungeon. Izuku told his mother that he would be back in 3 hours. Sonia looked toward him and warned him to be careful and not to do anything reckless in the dungeon, adding that if he returned badly injured she would ground him from going to dungeons for a month. Izuku smiled at his mother's worry, gave a thumbs up, and stepped through the blue portal. Sonia watched him go with concern, sighed, and returned to cooking dinner. A system notification announced that the instant dungeon Winterland had been successfully created. Izuku smirked, equipped his sword, and rushed into the nearby forest to train. Later, panting against a tree, Izuku drank potions to heal and replenish his stamina. He reflected that as he leveled up, the dungeon monsters had grown stronger, making progress more difficult. He checked his status display, which showed his name as Izuku, race high-class dragon, level 251, full HP and MP, and high stats across strength, agility, endurance, vitality, intelligence, sensing, and 0 ability points. Another system prompt informed him that he had reached the required level to ascend to the next rank and asked if he wanted to proceed with evolution, warning that the process would take 24 hours and require a large area. Izuku decided to begin the evolution the next morning so it could complete overnight, then left the dungeon. When he returned home he announced his arrival and Sonia rushed into the living room to check him. Sonia examined him for injuries with concern. When Izuku shook his head she sighed in relief and instructed him to freshen up and come down for dinner. Izuku gave a 2-finger salute, took a quick bath, and joined his mother for dinner. In the early morning he stood in the hall ready to leave. Sonia came downstairs in a tracksuit and asked if he had brought everything and whether he needed a lot of food before the evolution. Izuku indicated he was ready. As they drove to the forest, Izuku voiced concern about Sonia staying alone in the forest for 24 hours. Sonia reassured him with a laugh, explaining that she was not weak. She had been a martial arts teacher in her younger days and her quirk was combat-based. Sonia Shernan had been a kendo champion with her own school, and her quirk, Sword Birth, let her create swords from her body's energy. After a 20-minute drive they reached the forest and followed Izuku to his cave. They sat on the ground while Izuku opened his inventory and pulled out supplies: a tent, food, several water bottles, and other necessities. Sonia remarked that his inventory was useful. Izuku organized the space where his mother would stay while he would do the evolution in the clearing in front of the cave. They exchanged a nod, and Izuku walked into the clearing and took a deep breath. Sonia cautioned him to be careful. Izuku smiled and asked her to take care as well. Dark clouds gathered, a thunderstorm began to form above the forest, and a violent red aura concentrated around Izuku, coalescing into a spinning sphere with him at its center. Sonia watched from the cave entrance, torn between worry and confidence in her son. She approached the red sphere and, instead of feeling danger, sensed a gentle warmth. She rested her hands against it and, briefly moved by relief, hugged the sphere before returning to the cave to keep watch. Night continued. Sonia sat by a small campfire and watched the stars while keeping an eye on the rapidly growing red sphere, which had become a large, violently spinning orb. After eating the dinner she had packed that morning, she put out the fire, prepared her sleeping space in the tent, and set an alarm for early morning. In the pre-dawn hour she checked the time and noticed the sphere beginning to crack. She stepped back to a safe distance. The orb released a burst of pressure and red energy that swept across the clearing like a dramatic pulse, sending reverberating shockwaves through the forest. Thunder rolled, lightning flashed, and the ground trembled as fragments of the sphere dissipated into the air. When the light settled, a very large red dragon stood at the center of the clearing, radiant and imposing, with glowing eyes, wide draconic wings, strong limbs and a long tail, and a pair of horns on its head. Sonia's eyes widened in amazement as she saw her son's true dragon form. The dragon turned its head toward the sky and let out a roar so immense that the whole of Mizudafu trembled. People panicked at the tremors and the sound. All active heroes launched searches for the source but could not immediately pinpoint it. Neighbors climbed to their roofs and discovered a large red dragon in the middle of the forest, many of them filming and speculating that an ancient creature had awakened. Some suggested it might be a dragon quirk like the pro-hero Ryuko. Within minutes, police and heroes were dispatched to respond. Izuku looked down and saw his mother staring at him, her eyes wide with equal parts shock and wonder. He brought his large snout toward her. She stepped forward and gently rubbed it, then urged him to revert to human form so they could leave before the heroes arrived. Izuku nodded and closed his eyes, shifting back into his human body. Though only 12 years old, his human form was unexpectedly muscular and the stature of a full-grown adult. He hugged his mother, and together they gathered the items they had bought before leaving the area. Izuku could feel an enormous surge of energy within him. His body hummed as if it needed to expend that power. Reached home, he told his mother he planned to go out to train and burn off the excess energy. Sonia looked at him for a moment, nodded, and warned him to be careful. Izuku launched himself toward the nearby park at full speed and in an instant was there, a blur moving like a jet. He glanced around and then sprinted to the beach, which had been turned into a dumping ground by careless visitors. He sighed at the sight of the trash but saw an opportunity to train and to do something useful. A short neutral notice in his mind marked a change. He had ascended to the rank of Dragon King and acquired a powerful breath ability tied to that title. The revelation left him shaken for a moment, but he quickly composed himself and accepted the new name he intended to use: Izuku Shurnan, the Dragon King. He resolved inwardly to confront Yue someday. Without wasting more time, Izuku began picking up every piece of garbage he could find and moving it to the municipal dump at a speed that made him nearly invisible to onlookers. Passers-by recorded him as he blurred among them, and a few pro-heroes attempted to intervene but could not catch him. After 2 hours of relentless work, the beach was transformed and looked beautiful once more. He sat on the sand with a satisfied smile, watching the blue water gleam under the sun and already thinking about asking his mother if they could have a picnic there. A tall, lean blonde man approached with a friendly smile and introduced himself as Toshinori Yagi, a neighbor who had been watching the beach for months. He explained that he had tried and failed to motivate people to stop littering and that he was grateful Izuku had taken the initiative to clean the place. Toshinori asked for Izuku's name out of genuine curiosity. Izuku replied that he was Izuku Shurnan and, when asked why he had cleaned the beach, said it was for training and community service. Izuku then remembered he needed to get home before his mother worried and stood to leave. Toshinori wished him well and encouraged him to keep up the hard work. As Izuku walked away, Toshinori watched him go, thinking that the boy was undoubtedly very strong. Izuku face-bombed and admitted that he had forgotten, while Sonia chuckled. They were having lunch and Sonia had just asked about Izuku's plans for school. The idea had completely slipped his mind. Sonia suggested a nearby school named Aldra Junior High and offered to check it out tomorrow, and Izuku declined before standing to put the dishes in the sink. Izuku said that he planned to be homeschooled until UA, and Sonia considered the idea before nodding in agreement. She felt homeschooling would suit him, since he was well ahead of other children his age. Izuku then asked about his mother's job, and Sonia smiled as she explained that she had taken 2 weeks' leave, so there was no problem. They sat back down to talk more, both enjoying the conversation. Later, Izuku told his mother that he was leaving. Sonia told him to be careful, and he nodded before stepping out. He was heading to a nearby shop to pick up groceries for Sonia. He thought the day was pleasant and checked his status screen, which he had upgraded greatly over the last 3 years since ascending to the rank of Dragon King. His status read that his name was Izuku, his race Dragon King, his title Dragon King of Destruction, level 321, with full health and mana pools and high attributes in strength, agility, endurance, vitality, intelligence, senses, and no available ability points. For the last 3 years, Izuku had reduced his training slightly to spend more time with his mother, who had opened a new kendo coaching center using the money she had saved. Izuku kept most of his funds in the system and usually spent only on potions rather than expensive weapons. He was glad his mother was happy in her new profession. Izuku had often run into Toshinori, who lived nearby and walked a lot. Despite Izuku's cold demeanor and attempts to avoid him, a small bond had developed from their regular meetings over the past 3 years. Toshinori had invited Izuku home a few times, but Izuku had declined, saying he felt uncomfortable in someone else's house. After paying for the groceries and packing them into a cloth bag, Izuku walked out listening to music on his phone. As he passed over a bridge, his instincts kicked in and he leapt aside, barely avoiding an incoming slime creature. The slime taunted him in a taunting, distorted voice, suggesting Izuku submit, but Izuku answered by telling the creature to stop kidnapping and go to jail. The slime grew annoyed and lunged, but Izuku easily dodged while sending a quick message on his phone. Izuku considered the slime's slimy body rendered physical attacks ineffective, but he had other methods. He exhaled a controlled jet of fire that caught the slime by surprise and overwhelmed it. Smoke filled the area, and though the creature writhed, it did not bleed or suffer graphic injury. Izuku relied on his trained senses to determine its position and then sealed it into a plastic bottle to prevent escape. As he was screwing the cap on, Izuku heard someone approaching through a vent. A gust of air announced the arrival of a tall, broad-shouldered man with blonde hair. Izuku recognized him immediately as the current #1 hero and symbol of peace, All Might. All Might bellowed his familiar declaration of presence and scanned the area for the slime. Izuku raised the bottle to show him the captured villain. All Might thanked the young man for capturing the villain and praised his strong will and quirk. Izuku explained that the capture had been easy and then asked All Might for an autograph, producing a small notebook from his inventory. All Might obligingly signed the notebook, then asked for Izuku's name. Izuku introduced himself politely, and All Might was briefly surprised by the contrast between Izuku's cold demeanor with others and his polite excitement now. Izuku accepted the notebook back, eyes shining. All Might then said he needed to deliver the villain to the police station and told Izuku he would see him later, before launching into the sky with a powerful burst of air. Izuku watched with a smile and then began walking back toward home. Unfortunately, he sensed that trouble tended to follow him wherever he went. A large explosion drew Izuku's attention from his neighborhood. His eyes widened as he thought of his mother. He immediately used his maximum speed and reached the site in an instant, moving so fast that even fighter jets would have been outpaced. Relief came when he saw the blast had occurred 2 streets away from his house. Ahead, a group of 3 villains were causing chaos. One wielded fire, another manipulated metal, and the third had an enlargement ability. Only 2 heroes were on scene, Backdraft and Kamui Woods, but they were struggling to contain the situation. Toshinori stood toward the rear with a frustrated look on his face. Several schoolchildren watched from the sidelines. Izuku focused on the fire-wielding villain and, with a blink of speed, appeared behind him. He told the villain that he had caused enough trouble, knocked him unconscious, and sent him flying toward the others. The remaining two villains turned in shock as the crowd reacted with surprised faces at a single teenager confronting them. The enlargement villain shouted at him, but Izuku extended his hand and used a mental hold to stop him in midair. The fleeing metal man tried to run, but Izuku vanished and reappeared behind him, surprising him into SBMson. Izuku said it was time for the villain to sleep, and the man blacked out. The enlargement villain was quickly secured by Kamui Woods. The crowd applauded Izuku's bravery. He threw the last subdued villain toward Kamui Woods and then disappeared with a burst of speed before a conversation could begin. Kamui Woods searched for him in surprise. Toshinori watched with mild surprise at the sight of a lone teenager handling three villains. Nearby, an ash-blonde youth muttered that he could have handled it alone. A green-haired girl gave him an unamused look and walked away, and he followed, grumbling under his breath. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief at having avoided a lecture from a pro-hero. He returned home and announced that he was back. Inside, he found his mother with an angry expression and an unknown man standing in the living room behaving aggressively toward her. Izuku's expression hardened into a menacing glare that made the stranger freeze in fear. Izuku advanced toward the man with clear intent to intimidate, but his mother intervened and asked him to calm down, insisting they proceed through legal channels and to call the police. Izuku's eyes showed his intensity as he clenched his fist so hard the can he held crushed in his hand. He took a deep breath, calmed himself, and called the police to report a case of harassment. Sonia held the man at sword point as Izuku moved to lift him by the collar. He asked if the man had anything to say before he handed him over to the authorities. Sonia, with a look of disgust, asked Izuku to step outside so the house would not be further damaged and to hold back a little. Izuku nodded and escorted the man outside. A few minutes later, the police arrived at the same time as Izuku. Detective Tsukachi and the officers were surprised by the man's condition. He had been thoroughly incapacitated but was still alive. Izuku handed the man to the police, who checked him and showed relief that he had survived. Izuku gave Detective Tsukachi a cold look that made the detective flinch. Izuku informed the detective that his mother was inside. Detective Tsukachi followed him into the house, where Sonia was calmly making tea. She invited them to sit. After serving the tea, Sonia sat beside Izuku while Tsukachi took a seat on the opposite couch with a notepad. Detective Tsukachi asked Sonia to explain what had happened from the start. Sonia said that the man had come to her house claiming his child wanted to join the academy. He had been invited in to discuss the application, but during the visit he became aggressive and crossed boundaries, forcing her to stop the meeting and call for help. Sonia finished her explanation with a smile, saying that Izuku had come in suddenly and his condition had made it clear what had happened. Tsukachi noted everything down, sweat beading on his forehead, thinking that her son was very dangerous. After taking statements from both Izuku and Sonia and advising Izuku to be more restrained, Tsukachi left. Sonia commented that it had been quite an event. Izuku nodded, stood up, and told his mother that he would go to his room to prepare for the UA entrance exam in 2 months. Sonia called for breakfast, summoning her son to come downstairs while he got dressed in a tracksuit. Izuku checked himself in the mirror and murmured that today was the day. It was one of the most important days of his life because the UA entrance exam he had dreamed of since childhood was happening now. He smiled to himself and went downstairs. Sonia sat with him as he ate bread with butter and orange juice and asked how he was feeling. Izuku said he was very excited. Sonia, growing serious, reminded him that he had prepared well but should not be reckless during the practical exam. Izuku chuckled nervously and nodded. After breakfast and once his things were ready for the exam, Izuku stood at the front door with his mother. They locked the house, got into the car, and Sonia drove toward UA Academy. Izuku looked out the window and thought that it was time to show the world he was serious about becoming a great hero. After a 20-minute drive they arrived at UA. Izuku stepped out of the car and stared at the school, his red eyes bright with excitement. Sonia wished him good luck and encouraged him to aim for the top, then pressed a quick kiss to his forehead. Izuku blushed slightly at the attention of nearby students, but he forced his embarrassment aside and returned her smile. Sonia waved and left, and Izuku watched her go before turning back to take in the school once more. A rude, angry voice called from behind him, telling him to get out of the way. Izuku turned and saw an ash-blonde boy approaching with an angry expression. The boy's glare annoyed Izuku, but he remained still when the boy repeated his demand. The ash-blonde pulled his hand from his pocket and small explosions began popping in his palm as a show of force. Izuku observed the explosions without flinching, calling the display pathetic, which only made the boy angrier. The ash-blonde, known as Katsuki Bakugo, shouted a fierce threat and launched an explosive blast toward Izuku. Bakugo smirked as the blast seemed to hit, but when he turned around he was surprised to see Izuku standing calmly and unharmed. Bakugo moved to strike again but was halted by a green-haired girl who used a telekinetic quirk to stop him. The girl, Izumi Yagi, reminded him that Aunt Mitsuki had told him to keep his temper in check. She released him after a moment, apologized to Izuku for her friend, and explained that Bakugo had a short temper. Izuku ignored Bakugo and walked toward the UA building, followed curiously by Izumi, who had seen how quickly he had appeared behind Bakugo and suspected he had a speed-based quirk. Inside a large hall where other candidates were gathered and talking, Izuku examined his admit card and found his seat. Pro Heroes Ectoplasm and Snipe entered and asked everyone to take their seats before distributing answer sheets and question booklets. Izuku scanned the written exam and found it straightforward. When the bell rang, he worked swiftly and completed a 3-hour paper in 45 minutes. He stood and informed Snipe that he had finished and wished to submit his answer sheet. Snipe suggested he recheck his work, but Izuku declined and handed over the sheet. Snipe then directed him to proceed to another hall. As Izuku left the hall, he noticed other students watching him with disbelief or mockery, but he ignored them and made his way to the next location Snipe had mentioned. After waiting 2 hours, other students began arriving and taking seats. Izuku glanced at the neighboring seat and, to his annoyance, found Bakugo sitting nearby. Bakugo gave him a menacing glare while small explosions still flickered in his hands, but Izuku ignored him and turned his attention to the stage. Soon someone came and sat between him and Bakugo. He turned his head and saw that it was Izumi. Izumi smiled at Izuku, who looked at her for a moment before turning his attention back to the stage. Izumi offered a small, uneasy gesture at Izuku's cold demeanor. Present Mike took the stage and explained the practical exam, calling for responses from the audience as he went. Izuku ignored him and studied the pamphlet that had been handed out. It contained the full details of the practical test. A boy with glasses interrupted Present Mike and attempted to speak, but Izuku fixed him with an intense glare that shut him up and sent him back to his seat, leaving several students puzzled. When the explanation ended, Present Mike told the students to check their assigned battle centers. Izuku discovered he was in Battle Center B. Everyone boarded the buses to their centers. Izuku took a corner seat and watched the passing landscape, tuning out the chatter on the bus. At one point he glanced at the neighboring seat and noticed an orange-haired girl talking with another student before returning his gaze to the window. They approached a large gate and disembarked in front of it. Some students talked, some warmed up and stretched for the test. Izuku stood silently, his eyes scanning everyone with a precise, calculating look. Present Mike loudly called for readiness and the gate opened. Most students expected a countdown and hesitated, but Izuku dashed inside so quickly that no one noticed him move, except the orange-haired girl who had been looking in his direction and watched him vanish. Present Mike announced that there was no countdown in the real world and that one examinee had already scored 15 points, prompting the others to rush in and find parts of robots scattered across the area. Izuku blurred through the streets, taking down rogue robots with raw, powerful strikes while wearing a bored expression. He thought that UA might offer a stiffer challenge. These machines felt like simple toys as he continued to disable them. In the observation room, a tired man with messy black hair watched the students across many screens and commented that this cohort was interesting. Vlad King agreed that this year seemed stronger than the last. The teachers discussed the different approaches students were taking. Aizawa asked who was at the top of the leaderboard. Nizu checked his tablet and reported that the student in first place was Izuku Shurnon with 84 points, a surprising tally only 5 minutes into the exam. All Might requested to see the student, and Nizu brought up a large monitor showing Izuku casually dismantling robots while yawning. Snipe observed that Izuku did not appear to be taking the exam seriously. Midnight speculated that his quirk might be a strength type, but Nizu corrected them. His quirk was telekinesis, not physical enhancement. Aizawa and Vlad King realized that Izuku was effectively using tremendous physical force through his telekinesis. Nizu then triggered the next phase of the exam with a manic laugh. Izuku had already accrued more than enough points to aim for the hero course and was helping other participants when the artificial city suddenly shook. Everyone turned toward the noise and saw something towering above the buildings, the zero-pointer. Panic spread as students began to flee. Izuku stood watching the chaos with a look of disdain until his attentiveness picked up the faint cries of someone trapped under rubble. Others either did not notice or kept running. Izuku muttered that if these were the people who wanted to be heroes, they needed to prove themselves, then ran to the rubble. He cleared debris and found a brown-haired girl with a rounded face, who looked up at him with tears and gratitude. He smiled and lifted her. She had injured her ankle and needed help to evacuate, but the zero-pointer was closing in. The orange-haired girl arrived and announced that she was there to help. Izuku handed the injured girl to her and made it clear that she should escape. When the orange-haired girl tentatively asked if he was not coming, Izuku shook his head and urged her to run. The girl reluctantly fled. Izuku faced the robot and, with a powerful leap that left a crater beneath him, launched a decisive strike. The force of the blow sent the robot staggering, its head separating in a burst of sparks and smoke, and the machine collapsed with loud clangs that echoed through the street. Everyone stared wide-eyed as Izuku landed and turned to them with a cold expression that made them step back. He then asked what kind of people they were. A girl was trapped under rubble, crying for help, but no one came to her aid. Instead, everyone fled in panic. Izuku stared at them and reprimanded them for behaving like that when they should be heroes. Everyone except Kendo and the brown-haired girl Uraraka looked down. Kendo and Uraraka stared at Izuku with wide eyes. Izuku moved toward them and checked that Uraraka was all right. She nodded. Present Mike announced that the recovery medic had arrived and asked anyone who was injured to come forward. Izuku turned to the gate and saw an elderly woman with a cane approaching. The woman, recovery girl, asked if anyone was hurt. Izuku pointed at Uraraka, who confirmed she needed help. Recovery girl directed Kendo to lower Uraraka. After Uraraka sat down, recovery girl gave her a healing kiss and Uraraka glowed green as her ankle healed. Uraraka said the injury was gone but that she felt tired. Recovery girl explained that fatigue was a side effect of her quirk and gave gummy supplements to the students to restore their stamina. She offered one to everyone. Izuku declined, insisting he was fine. A few minutes earlier in the observation room, Toshinori panicked and urged Nizu to stop the zero-pointer and prevent it from reaching the trapped girl. Nizu reported that the button had malfunctioned. Toshinori prepared to transform into his muscular form, but Aizawa stopped him and pointed to one of the monitors. On the screen, Izuku had already rescued Uraraka. Relief washed over Midnight, but it was brief. Snipe drew everyone's attention to the screen again, noting that Izuku was moving straight toward the zero-pointer. The teachers watched with mixed emotions. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, Toshinori tensed, and Nizu watched with excitement. Izuku approached the device and, with a single focused punch, destroyed the zero-pointer in a blast of energy. Most of the faculty reacted with stunned disbelief. Vlad King watched in shock, unable to hide his surprise. Snipe questioned whether Izuku's ability was truly telekinesis or if it was some form of physical strength. Nizu simply shrugged. Aizawa then declared that he wanted Izuku in his class, and Nizu agreed. Later, Izuku was leaving the exam site when he spotted his only friend in the crowd and hurried over. He called to Shinso, who stopped and looked up. Shinso offered a small smile, and Izuku asked about his exam performance. Shinso responded with a grin and a thumbs up, and the two walked toward the exit together. 2 years earlier, Izuku had first met Shinso when he saw him being bullied by classmates. Unable to stand by, Izuku intervened and confronted the bullies, taking them down so Shinso could be safe. Both boys were guarded and slow to trust others, but they gradually bonded over shared experiences of unfair treatment. Izuku admired Shinso's quirk and encouraged him to improve his fighting skills and physical strength to compensate for its limitations. Shinso appreciated having someone who understood and supported him. Izuku invited Shinso to his home several times, which pleased Izuku's mother, Sonia. Because their homes were on opposite sides of the city, the two friends eventually parted after the exam. Izuku used his speed to get home quickly so he could tell his mother about the test. A week had passed since the entrance exam, and Izuku sat in his room reading news online, waiting for the results. Sonia called from downstairs to announce that the results had arrived. Izuku rushed out and took the envelope from his mother before sitting with her on the couch. He opened it and found a small disc with a button. When he pressed it, a projection of All Might appeared. Izuku and Sonia were surprised to see All Might in the result video. In the projection, All Might announced that he had joined the UA faculty as their newest teacher. He addressed young Shernan and declared that Izuku had performed exceptionally well, crushing the exam by strength alone and placing first overall with a score of 94 villain points. Sonia beamed and hugged her son, proud of his achievement. All Might went on to explain that the exam's grading would also take heroic actions into account, emphasizing that the assessment was not solely about raw scores. The projection announced that Izuku had helped several students across the battle center and had saved a girl from the zero-pointer, earning 90 rescue points. With a total of 184 points, he had taken first position and broken All Might's old record of 130 points. The crowd welcomed him into his new path at UA Academy. Uraraka had not approached the announcer about Izuku's score because she and the other participants had seen how thoroughly he had dismantled every training robot. The projection ended, leaving Izuku and his mother surprised. Izuku shot his fist into the air and celebrated breaking All Might's record, and Sonia smiled proudly at her son. Even though Izuku had long suspected he had grown stronger than his idol, the knowledge that he had surpassed the symbol of peace filled him with a new level of joy and pride. Izuku quickly called Hitoshi Shinso to ask about his result. Shinso told Izuku that, thanks to his advice, he had earned 56 points and made it into the hero course, and he congratulated Izuku on his top score. Izuku deflected the credit, insisting it had been Shinso's hard work. Shinso asked about the celebration plans and Izuku suggested meeting the next day. Shinso agreed and Izuku said he would send the time and location. They talked for a few more minutes about trivial things before hanging up. Izuku lay down on his bed with a smile and drifted off to sleep. Downstairs, Sonia called that breakfast was ready. Izuku checked himself in the mirror and thought of how, as a child, he had watched other kids wear the school uniform and now at last he was wearing it himself. He told his mother he was coming, sat opposite her, and accepted her compliment on how good the uniform looked on him. He blushed and thanked her, then ate quickly before the food grew cold. After getting fully ready, Izuku stood at the front door with his mother. They locked the house and drove toward UA. While driving, Sonia remarked that she could tell from his expression that Izuku was equal parts excited and nervous. Izuku laughed and admitted she was right. They stopped at the metro station where Shinso was waiting. Izuku invited Shinso into the car and Shinso sat in the back seat. Shinso greeted Sonia, and Sonia returned the greeting with her usual cheer. Izuku had insisted on picking Shinso up each day after Shinso initially said he could manage on his own. Shinso had reluctantly agreed. They drove a few more minutes, talked in the car, and soon arrived at UA. Izuku and Shinso thanked Sonia, who wished them luck before driving away. The two boys watched other students in UA uniforms enter the building. Shinso noted that it was good they were in the same class, and they followed the school map toward their classroom. The school felt large and the hallways confusing. When they reached classroom 1A, they found a massive door with the class number painted on it. Shinso, using his enhanced senses, said he could hear a blonde student yelling from inside. When they opened the door, they found two students arguing. A dark blue-haired boy with glasses and an ash-blonde boy. The blue-haired student had told the blonde to remove his feet from the desk as a sign of respect. The disagreement continued while other students watched with nervous expressions. Izuku sighed and moved toward his seat, but he caught a hand that had reached for his shoulder. A brown-haired girl, the one he had saved during the earlier exercise, remarked on his quick reflexes, and Shinso glanced at her. Izuku identified her as the girl he had helped. She pointed to his hand and asked him to let go politely. He released her hand and apologized. She waved it off and said it was all right. Shinso looked on with mild amusement. A tired voice then drew their attention. A man with messy black hair lay in a yellow sleeping bag near the front of the room and appeared to be drinking juice. Uraraka and Shinso looked surprised. Izuku narrowed his eyes but remained calm because he had already sensed the man. Izuku's analysis ability activated and revealed the man's identity and abilities. The man was Shota Aizawa, known as Eraserhead, with the quirk Erasure, which allowed him to negate other quirks within his field of vision. Izuku noted that human capabilities varied widely and that, although stats were unbalanced relative to level, humans remained versatile and could develop a wide range of useful skills. Izuku thought that most people these days only focused on their quirk or the field closest to it. Aizawa warned the class that anyone who was there just to make friends should leave, then crawled over to the teacher's podium while Shinso, Izuku, and Uraraka took their seats. Izuku sat beside the green-haired girl and diagonal to the ash-blonde boy. He looked around and found Shinso just behind Izumi. Aizawa introduced himself, noting that it had taken the students 8 seconds to settle and calling that irrational. He identified himself as Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher for the next 3 years in the hero course, then produced a P uniform and instructed them to put it on and go to the training ground. The class sat in stunned silence. Izuku and Shinso exchanged a glance, nodded, took 2 uniforms from the podium, and left. As they departed, the rest of the students rushed to find uniforms of their sizes and change. By the time the class reached the training ground, Izuku and Shinso were already there. Aizawa remarked that they were unexpectedly early. Izuku and Shinso stood with him and waited patiently for the rest of the class to arrive. When the group finally assembled, Aizawa scolded them for being late and announced a quirk assessment test. The announcement shocked most of the students. Bakugo responded with a smirk, while Todoroki and Izuku remained composed. Uraraka asked about orientation. Aizawa replied that there was no time for orientation if they intended to become heroes and reminded them that UA teachers had autonomy in their class. Aizawa called on Izuku, noting that he had come first in the entrance exam, and asked him to throw a ball while remaining inside a marked circle. Izuku stepped forward amid the focused attention of his classmates and noticed a few hostile glares, but he also realized that All Might was watching. Aizawa tossed a softball to Izuku. Izuku caught it, stood in the middle of the circle, looked at the ball in his hand, and readied himself. When he threw, a powerful shockwave rippled outward. The blast pushed Aizawa and several students back a few meters, and a few classmates were knocked to the ground by the force. Izuku thought he had held back a lot as he watched his shaken classmates begin to recover. Denki Kaminari reacted with astonishment at the sheer force. Momo Yaoyorozu speculated that the throw required immense physical strength. Aizawa interrupted to reveal that Izuku did not have a strength quirk and held up a device whose screen read 5450 m. The unexpected measurement sent the class into an uproar. Hanta Siro stared wide-eyed and insisted it seemed impossible that Izuku had produced that effect with only his physical body. Izumi watched the red-haired student in shock, and Bakugo scowled in anger. Even Aizawa was surprised by the display and wondered whether Izuku's quirk might be telekinesis. All Might's jaw dropped as he observed the power. Aizawa silenced the class with a firm, commanding gaze and a brief demonstration of his own quirk. The students immediately fell quiet. He then told Izuku to return to his place, and Izuku went back to the spot beside Shinso. The pink-skinned girl expressed excitement at the prospect of using their quirks for the tests, and several classmates agreed. Izuku noticed a small, smug grin on Aizawa's face and sighed, thinking that someone had set things in motion. Aizawa's tone grew darker as he challenged the idea that the testing would simply be fun. He announced that whoever placed last across all the assessments would be considered without potential and would be expelled from the school. Uraraka protested that it was unfair. Aizawa replied by asking whether natural disasters, bullying, or innocent deaths in villain attacks were fair, and he said it was the duty of heroes to overcome such unfairness. He then reminded them that they had already wasted quite a lot of time. Aizawa announced that the test would begin as everyone in the class prepared. Sometime later, at the ball-throwing test, Aizawa called Bakugo for his turn. Bakugo stepped forward with a confident smirk, thinking that he would show everyone who would be number one as he eyed the ball in his hand. He shouted a harsh exclamation as he threw the ball. Izumi reacted with a nervous sweat, and the others looked at Bakugo with puzzled expressions. The display registered 705 meters, and Bakugo gritted his teeth and glared at Izuku, who paid him no mind. Aizawa then tossed the next ball to Yagi and indicated that she was up. Izumi caught it with a determined expression. Izuku studied her closely, sensing that something about her was different and feeling an unexpected connection between them. He noted that any resemblance in their appearances might be coincidence, but his instincts told him there was a bond, and he trusted those instincts because they had saved him many times. Izumi prepared herself and threw the ball using both of her quirks, breaking the sound barrier and creating a huge shockwave. The screen registered 2,032 meters, and the whole class watched Izumi in amazement. A big, pleased smile formed on her face as she realized her hard work had paid off. All Might watched from a distance with a proud smile, very happy that his daughter had become so strong. Aizawa explained that he would combine all the test scores and display the combined class ranking. A hologram appeared showing the standings. First place went to Izuku Shirnan, second to Izumi Yagi, third to Momo Yaoyorozu, fourth to Shoto Todoroki, fifth to Katsuki Bakugo, and so on. Izuku congratulated Shinso on coming in 12th and encouraged him to keep working toward the top 5. Shinso thanked him and reminded Izuku not to forget his own standing at the top of the class, which made Izuku chuckle. Aizawa then called for Shinso's attention and demanded an explanation for why he had not used his quirk during any of the tests, warning that failure to give his all could lead to expulsion. The class reacted with surprise. Shinso glanced at Aizawa with clear displeasure. Izuku narrowed his eyes at Aizawa while the teacher maintained his stern expression. Izuku said that he was not there to brag, but if he were to get serious he would need something that could even challenge All Might. The class looked at him in disbelief, and Aizawa showed a small, surprised reaction. Bakugo shouted that Izuku was no match for All Might and glared at him with open hostility. Izuku met the challenge, his eyes briefly glowing red as tension rose in the air. Izumi watched them both nervously. She found Izuku's statement hard to accept given that All Might was her father and the symbol of peace, but the idea still struck her as unlikely. Determined to demonstrate his capabilities, Izuku raised his arms toward the school building. His hands began to glow red and seismic tremors rippled through the campus, causing students and teachers to stagger. All Might, who had been observing from behind a wall, looked on in disbelief. Principal Nizu, who had been calmly drinking coffee in his office, rushed out in a panic when he felt the ground shake and saw teachers searching for the cause. Students in classrooms panicked as the tremors continued. People outside the campus recorded the scenes in shock as the buildings itself seemed to lift. With a slight, confident smile, Izuku caused the entire UA campus to lift from the ground. The uprooting of the campus drew frantic calls from the police to the faculty, and everyone Aizawa, All Might, the teachers, and the students felt a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief as the school rose into the air. All Might stepped forward and demanded that Izuku stop. Izuku glanced at All Might and Aizawa, then nodded. The campus descended gently at his control. When it touched back down, another tremor sent people off balance once more. Midnight and the rest of the faculty arrived outside, trying to understand what had just happened. After the commotion settled and the explanations were given, Shinso told Izuku that what he had done had been excessive and that they both knew it. The two of them walked toward the locker room while the situation was resolved. Izuku accepted the scolding and the extra assignments he had been given without complaint. He knew he had acted on impulse in the heat of the moment. Inside the boys' changing room, Shinso admitted that he was impressed and had not realized Izuku was strong enough to lift the entire UA campus. The other boys turned to look as Izuku entered, which made him a little uncomfortable, but he ignored their stares and began to change out of his P uniform. Kirishima approached him and expressed admiration for what he had done outside, saying that it had been impressive and that he did not think any pro hero could easily match that feat. Kaminari noted that, Putting aside how effortlessly Izuku had done it, he was still in disbelief about what had happened outside. Shiro wondered how Izuku could be so strong despite being their age. Izuku glanced at Shiro and explained that he had trained his whole life to reach this level. The other boys watched Izuku with amazement as they changed their clothes, and even Bakugo found himself surprised by how powerful Izuku truly was. After changing, everyone returned to the classroom and took their seats. Izumi remained in shock after seeing Izuku's power and thought that even her father's seemed less impressive by comparison. She could not ignore the resemblance between her and Izuku, their similar facial structure, similar names, and the fact that both of them had telekinesis as their quirk. It might be a coincidence, she told herself, but she could not shake the feeling that something else was at work. Bakugo kept glancing at Izuku with an angry look, wondering how Izuku could be so strong. That sentiment spread through Class 1A after witnessing the full extent of Izuku's ability. The classroom door opened and Aizawa entered looking more tired than usual. He informed them that, because it was their first day, the rest of homeroom would be free, then lay down in his sleeping bag to rest. The pink-haired girl Mina suggested using the free PRD to get to know one another, and the others agreed. Izuku said coldly that he had no interest in introducing himself and that when the time came they would learn about him, then rested with his eyes closed. Kaminari remarked that Izuku was cold, while Shinso looked at his friend with a hint of sadness. Later, Izuku returned home. He had asked his mother not to come by in the afternoon. His mother, Sonia, welcomed him back and asked how his first day had been. Izuku replied dryly that it had been fine and nothing too interesting. Sonia then asked whether he had been responsible for the morning incident at UA. Izuku admitted that, if she meant the campus floating, he had been involved but insisted it was not entirely his fault. He said others had underestimated him and he had only demonstrated the difference in their abilities. Sonia sighed but accepted his explanation, telling him to change quickly while she set the dining table. The next morning, Sonia told him to take care and not cause any trouble as she left. Izuku watched her drive away and smiled before heading into UA. He heard a familiar voice and turned to see his friend Shinso running toward him. Shinso had told Izuku the previous day that his mother would take him to school, which was why he had not arrived with Izuku earlier. They greeted each other and walked toward class together. Shinso teased about whether Izuku had been scolded by his mother. Izuku said he had explained everything and that his mother had accepted it but warned him not to repeat it. Shinso asked if Izuku was excited for their first heroic class, and Izuku admitted he was. As they entered the classroom, many of their classmates stared at them. Izuku asked why they were staring, and Shinso advised him to try to relax, reminding him that not everyone was like those who had been involved in the incident. Izuku replied that both of them knew it was not easy. Izumi greeted Shinso and another student named Hitoshi. Shinso returned the greeting while Izuku only nodded, which made Izumi a little nervous. The bell rang and Aizawa entered, announcing that they would undertake an important task, choosing the class president. The class immediately erupted with students declaring their interest. Aizawa used his quirk to quiet the room and said he would nap while they decided, but he expected the class president and vice president to be chosen by the end of homeroom. He then lay back down and fell asleep. Ida proposed holding a vote, and the class gradually agreed after he explained his reasoning. Izuku thought that he should avoid being considered and, glancing around, wrote Ida's name on his ballot before leaning back with his eyes closed. Later, Shinso woke Izuku and pointed out the results. Izumi had been elected class president with 6 votes, Momo had become vice president with 3 votes, and Ida had received at least 2 votes, which left him feeling both disappointed and somewhat satisfied. Aizawa announced that, from then on, Yagi would serve as class president and Yaoyorozu as vice president for the year, and the PRD continued as usual. At lunch, Uraraka, Momo, Shinso, Izumi, Ida, and Izuku sat together. Izuku looked around at them briefly before continuing to eat. Uraraka asked Ida whether he was disappointed about not becoming class president. Ida shook his head and explained that, although he had wanted the position, he believed Izumi Yagi was worthy of it, which was why he had voted for her. Izumi asked who had voted for Ida, and the others shook their heads. Only Izuku remained silent, eating his food. Izuku hesitated before responding. Izumi asked nervously who Izuku had voted for, expecting either a cold response or to be ignored, but Izuku answered calmly that he had voted for Ida, which surprised everyone. Shinso reacted dramatically, suggesting he had expected Izuku to vote for him, and Izuku responded deadpan that Ida had seemed the best choice for the position from his perspective. Ida thanked Izuku with a determined expression and a clap of his hands, promising to work hard to live up to the praise. Momo then wondered aloud who would teach their heroics class after lunch, and the others began to speculate. Izuku noticed that Izumi was not lost in thought like the rest, which suggested she already knew something, but he did not comment and instead finished his lunch quietly. When the bell rang, everyone returned to class still wondering who their heroics teacher would be. Izuku guessed it would be All Might and felt excited at the thought. The door opened and All Might burst in with his usual dramatic entrance, announcing that he was coming through like a normal person. Izumi and Izuku both internally face-bombed at the theatrics while the other students stared in awe at the #1 hero. All Might loudly informed the class that he would be their heroics teacher and that they would be doing battle training that day. He then asked rhetorically what a hero would be without a costume, pressed a button, and 20 suitcases popped out. He instructed everyone to collect a suitcase and change before meeting him at the mock city, then hurried outside. The students grabbed their suitcases and followed. A few minutes later, everyone emerged from the tunnel in their costumes. Izuku had chosen simple black clothing with a dragon symbol on the back. Izumi pointed out that his outfit looked like normal clothes, and Izuku explained that he did not need a special costume because of his high endurance, which drew a few surprised reactions and a few knowing nods. All Might then cleared his throat to get everyone's attention and explain the exercise. He said that the class would be randomly split into teams of 2. The scenario was that villains had hidden a nuclear device in a building. The hero's objective was to capture the villains or touch the device, while the villain's objective was to defend the device or defeat the heroes. Each test would last 20 minutes. To decide partners, All Might produced 2 boxes and explained they would be used to pair students. Izuku ended up teamed with Momo on the hero's side, and their opponents were Todoroki and Bakugo. Bakugo and Izuku exchanged hostile glares. Todoroki maintained his usual stoic expression, and Momo looked worried. All Might announced that the villains could enter the building, and Todoroki and Bakugo went inside. Momo asked Izuku if he had a plan, and Izuku shaking his head said he was open to any of Momo's ideas. Momo suggested that Bakugo and Todoroki might be unwilling to cooperate, which they could exploit by coordinating their efforts while the opponents remained divided. Izuku agreed that it was a sound tactic. All Might's voice over the speaker then told the heroes they could enter, and they did. Izuku's senses heightened in true anime fashion as he detected danger around the corner. He pulled Momo back just in time for an explosion to erupt where she had been standing moments before, and they were pushed apart by the blast of debris and smoke. The action remained fast and dramatic but non-graphic. Kirishima commented that Bakugo's sneak attack did not seem very manly, and All Might replied that because Bakugo was acting as a villain in the exercise, a surprise attack was an effective tactic. Kirishima nodded and focused on the monitor. Izuku acknowledged Bakugo's move as a good one. At one point Izuku had grabbed Momo briefly to steady her after the blast. Momo asked to be released, and Izuku let go, leaving her a little flustered from the sudden closeness. She blushed but composed herself. Later, as the exercise concluded, Shinso walked out with Izuku and said that he had enjoyed their first hero class, and Izuku agreed. After the match, Todoroki was escorted to the infirmary for observation, while Bakugo sat in a quiet, brooding manner. All Might spoke with Bakugo briefly before bringing him to the observation room. Next it was Shinso's turn in the training rotation. He was paired with Koda against Kirishima and Kaminari. Because Shinso had declined to reveal his quirk during introductions, the others did not know how to anticipate him. He used that secrecy to his advantage, taking control of Kirishima and Kaminari and securing a win for his team. Many classmates were surprised by the nature and strength of his quirk and praised him, which made Shinso feel pleased. A cheerful Uraraka then approached with Ida and Izumi, and she asked whether they were both heading to the station. Izumi suggested that they all go together, and Izuku and Shinso exchanged a look before nodding. The group walked on together while talking, and Izuku hung back a little, walking alone. Izumi noticed and slowed to fall in beside him, prompting Izuku to raise an eyebrow. Izumi apologized if it sounded rude and asked whether he disliked social interaction. Izuku sighed, shook his head, and answered that he did not. Izumi did not press further and tried to keep the conversation going, but most of it was one-sided because Izuku replied in short phrases. Izuku announced his arrival at home and his mother Sonia came out to greet him. Sonia asked how school had been, and Izuku said it had been good. They had All Might as their heroics teacher and had done battle training that day, and he felt a little proud that he had won. Sonia chuckled. Izuku then told his mother he planned to visit the dungeon that coming weekend. Sonia looked at him for a moment and then told him to be careful because she did not want him to get injured. Izuku nodded. Out in a snowy forest, Izuku felt an overwhelming aura from the boss's direction and told himself the boss would be tough, but he had faced everything so far with confidence and this would be no exception. He dashed forward toward a group of ice bears. A sword materialized in his hand and he struck with a single decisive blow that dispatched the lead beast. After a few minutes he stood among the motionless ice bears, looking at his sword as it pulsed with residual energy. He marveled at the weapon's extraordinary sharpness and continued onward. Crouched behind a tree, he observed two small blue dragons. He noted that dragons likely meant the boss would be a dragon and that the coming battle would be difficult. He leapt in front of them. The dragons were surprised by the intruder. One questioned whether Izuku was a dragon as well. Izuku was surprised that they could speak, and the other dragon confirmed that the highest-level monsters could. The dragons told him that this was the territory of the ice dragons. Izuku said he was not there for conversation but to reach and defeat the dungeon boss, and he assumed a battle stance. The dragons warned him that they would make his death painful and attacked. Izuku, in human form and relying on agility, dodged a heavy strike and disabled one dragon's hind limb, drawing a painful roar. The other dragon fired a blue ice beam that struck and instantly froze a tree. The injured dragon continued to launch ice attacks. Izuku avoided them all, channeled mana into his sword until it glowed bright red, and activated his special technique, Z-slash. He vanished from their sight, causing the dragons to panic as they searched for him. A swift red blur sliced through the air in a Z pattern. When Izuku reappeared before them, both dragons collapsed. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a faint light coming from the dragons' bodies. Returning to them, he found two glowing crystal spheres. He activated his Analyze skill, which identified the items as dragon cores, mid-level compressed energy spheres that hold much of a dragon's power and can be absorbed to boost another being's strength. Izuku was amazed and decided to try absorbing them. He held both crystals and felt their energy flow into him. His body took on a red outline as the core's power transferred, and after a few minutes the crystals shattered. He felt refreshed and stronger despite the dragons having been weaker than him, and he wiped the sword clean of residue before walking away. A short time later he stood a little distance from a very large frozen ice palace and realized this must be where the king resided. He entered and found the halls unnervingly empty but kept his guard up. He located the throne room and pushed open a large door, which opened automatically to reveal a giant hall and a large frozen throne at the back. Sitting on the throne was a white-haired boy with blue hair and a smirk. The boy observed that the guest had finally arrived. A boy on the throne informed Izuku that the rumor of a rogue dragon entering his kingdom had proven true. Izuku stood before him, watching the boy with narrowed eyes. The boy acknowledged Izuku's awareness of his presence and implied he already knew why Izuku had come. Izuku activated his Analyze skill and scanned the boy. The scan revealed the following: the name Marcellus, race Dragon King, title Dragon King of Winter, the Blue Dragon King, level 552, strength 565, agility 500, endurance 601, vitality 576, intelligence 523, sensitivity. Izuku swallowed audibly at the overwhelming numbers. Marcellus smirked and remarked that the difference in power between them was obvious. Izuku gritted his teeth. He understood that his chances of surviving the duel were slim, but he resolved not to give up. He relaxed, exhaled, pointed his sword at Marcellus, and issued a direct challenge to battle as the Red Dragon King, introducing himself as Izuku Shurnon, the Dragon King of Destruction. Marcellus, amused and impressed by Izuku's resolve despite his inexperience, rose from the throne, summoned his own sword, and accepted the challenge, proposing a sword duel. In an instant he appeared directly in front of Izuku. 2 hours passed in the arena, the clash of blades filling the air. Izuku lunged with a move aimed at Marcellus's midsection, but Marcellus sidestepped with effortless grace and executed a precise parry that sent Izuku's blade aside. Before Izuku could recover, Marcellus answered with a swift riposte that grazed Izuku's cheek, a clear reminder of Marcellus's superior skill. Izuku attempted a feint to create an opening, but Marcellus saw through it and countered with a controlled flourish that neutralized the attack while displaying his mastery. Each movement from Marcellus was efficient and elegant, every strike deliberate, every defense reliable. As the duel continued, Marcellus dictated the pace, steering Izuku into a defensive posture with calculated strikes and sharp footwork. Izuku's attacks grew more desperate and erratic, while Marcellus remained composed, exploiting every small opening. In a decisive move, Marcellus disarmed Izuku with a deft twist of his wrist, sending the sword clattering to the ground, then leveled his blade at Izuku's throat to signal the end of the duel. The outcome was unmistakable. Marcellus had dominated the fight through superior technique and unshakable composure. Marcellus acknowledged Izuku's strength but pointed out that he was far from matching the other Dragon Kings, who possessed centuries of experience. He praised the fight as a good one and then made his blade vanish. Izuku asked in surprise if Marcellus intended to kill him, and Marcellus answered that he would not. Instead, he offered Izuku freedom and the chance to train under him if Izuku would ally with his kingdom. Izuku considered the offer carefully, weighing the benefits and dangers. After a few minutes he agreed to become Marcellus's ally. Marcellus approved of the decision and told Izuku to rest in the palace while he summoned maids and healers to restore him to full health. Izuku declined the offer, revealing that he had strong healing potions in a pocket dimension in his inventory. Marcellus reacted with surprise to the existence of Izuku's pocket dimension. Izuku's injuries and fatigue healed immediately after using the potions. He explained that he was not from this world and would be returning home, though he hoped to visit again. Marcellus had already suspected Izuku was from another world, reasoning that the sudden appearance of a new Dragon King would have caused havoc. Izuku prepared to leave the dungeon when Marcellus tossed a small circular object to him, a mana-powered communication device that would allow them to contact each other at any time. Izuku accepted it and tucked it into his pocket. Marcellus then disappeared briefly and reappeared with a glowing blue circular object. Izuku recognized it as a mana core and reacted with astonishment at the immense mana it radiated. Marcellus explained that the core belonged to one of their ancient kings, Dracius, the legendary dragon of winter. He explained that legendary dragons were a class above dragon kings and that, historically, there had been only 5 legendary dragons in total. Izuku muttered that they must be extraordinarily powerful. Marcellus handed the mana core to Izuku. Izuku stared in disbelief and asked why Marcellus would give him something so powerful and precious. Marcellus replied that he wanted Izuku to be strong as his ally. He admitted he had not used the core himself because it was currently beyond his reach, but he felt that Izuku, though weaker, might be able to absorb it completely. When Izuku questioned the risk of betrayal, Marcellus produced a piece of paper and presented a blood oath agreement. He explained that their verbal oath would be automatically recorded on the document and that signing it with their blood would complete the pact. Marcellus warned that if either of them broke the agreement it would result in immediate death, and Izuku gulped. After a few minutes, Izuku and Marcellus shook hands, having completed the blood oath. Marcellus bid Izuku farewell, and Izuku returned the goodbye before teleporting away. Shinso greeted his best friend with a good morning, and Izuku returned the greeting. Shinso then asked how Izuku's weekend had been, and Izuku smiled, saying it had been absolutely amazing. Shinso chuckled at that. Izumi greeted Shinso and Hitoshi as she sat down, and Shinso asked Izumi how her weekend had been. Izumi smiled and answered. Momo and Jairu soon joined the conversation. What had been a small group of Izuku and Shinso had expanded to include Izumi, Momo, and Jiraiya. Izuku had initially felt uncomfortable with the new additions, but over the week a bond had begun to form between him and the others. Although he did not speak often, he joined conversations sometimes, which was good progress for him. Izuku also discovered that the blonde man he had been meeting at the beach was Toshinori Yagi, a human known as All Might, the symbol of peace. All Might held a transferable quirk called One for All, which granted superhuman strength, durability, and agility to its user. Izuku noticed that the readouts showed significant reductions in All Might's strength, agility, endurance, vitality, and intelligence, with only his senses remaining unaffected. The term transferable kept returning to Izuku's thoughts, since it meant someone else could gain All Might's quirk by transfer. The similarity in surnames between Izumi and All Might suggested that Izumi might be his daughter. One of the more concerning details was the debuff applied to almost all of All Might's attributes, which significantly reduced his power. Ignoring that for the moment, Izuku planned to visit Marcellus that day to learn more about the dragon race. After returning home and eating lunch with his mother Sonia, Izuku told her about his recent dungeon trip, which greatly piqued Sonia's interest. Before he left to visit Marcellus, Sonia warned him to be careful, suggesting there might be ulterior motives behind Marcellus's actions, and Izuku agreed to be cautious. After saying goodbye to his mother, Izuku teleported back into the dungeon and found himself in the throne room again. Marcellus welcomed Izuku and said he was glad to see him. Izuku asked if he was disturbing Marcellus, and Marcellus shook his head, explaining that he had expected Izuku's visit and anticipated his curiosity about the dragon race. Izuku nodded awkwardly and the two of them began to walk together. Marcellus explained that, as legends and myths depicted, the dragon race was one of the strongest, if not the strongest, races in the entire world. Dragons were powerful beings composed of vast amounts of energy, highly intelligent, and guided by their own will, which sometimes made them seem selfish. According to historical records, dragons had appeared millions of years ago and disrupted the balance of nature because of their immense power. In earlier times, dragons had roamed independently with their own territories, but over time many were hunted and the species dwindled. To survive, the remaining dragons formed kingdoms based on type ice dragons, fairy dragons, lightning dragons, and so on. Marcellus told Izuku that he was the fourth king of this particular kingdom as they looked out over the realm from the palace balcony. He described the dragon social hierarchy: low-class dragons at the bottom, then middle-class, high-class, above them the dragon kings, then legendary dragons, and finally the dragon gods. Marcellus continued that in all of dragon history there had been only 3 dragon gods. 2 had died fighting each other and the last had been missing for thousands of years. Izuku observed that meant there were currently no dragon gods in the world, and Marcellus confirmed that was correct. He added that only 3 legendary dragons remained, each living independently in its own territory, and that there were 10 dragon kings in total, including Izuku. Izuku listened intently, absorbing the implications of Marcellus's words. Marcellus affirmed that gods, angels, devils, and other such beings did exist in their world. Marcellus recalled that he had fought 2 gods thousands of years ago when they had tried to conquer their planet, and that the whole race had united to defeat their army. His pride was clear, and Izuku smiled, his own heart swelling with pride in response. Marcellus then looked toward the sky and warned that if those gods struck again with far greater force, their chances of survival would be much lower than before. Izuku watched the landscape and asked which dragon god's core he had been given. Marcellus explained that the core belonged to their first king Dracuus, the dragon god of frost, who had fallen in battle against Falker, the dragon god of domination. Izuku nodded at the new information, and they spent more time exchanging details about their respective worlds. Marcellus showed interest in human technology and the school Izuku had attended. After a while, Izuku said his goodbyes and teleported back to his room. He told his mother everything Marcellus had said about the history of the dragons. She listened, shocked and intrigued. The next morning, Shinso greeted Izuku and noticed a glowing spherical object in his hand. Izumi, pouting, told Shinso she had been trying to get an answer for several minutes, which made Shinso chuckle. Izuku warned Shinso not to touch the object. Shinso stepped back and told him to calm down. Shinso then asked what it was, but Izuku kept it secret, calling it something precious. The class responded with a collective sigh. When the bell rang, everyone returned to their seats, and Aizawa announced that the next day they would go off campus for their first rescue training. Students could choose their UA uniform or their hero costume. He then called 2 students to join them. Mirio Togata and Nijire Hado entered the room. Mirio, blonde and cheerful, introduced himself, and Nijire, with periwinkle hair and a bubbly energy, immediately began asking questions of everyone in the room. Kaminari and Mineta reacted noticeably to Nijire's entrance, and the rest of the class watched with interest. Izuku observed them passively while the core in his possession pulsed with energy. A notification indicated that Izuku's adaptation skill had activated. He smiled at the message. The ability allowed him to gradually adapt to the core's power and absorb more energy than he otherwise could. Aizawa explained that Mirio and Nijire were part of UA's Big Three and among the strongest students at the school. Bakugo glared at them, small sparks forming in his hands, and the rest of the class whispered and watched. Nijire flitted from person to person, asking questions, and her curiosity and lightheartedness made an impression on Izuku. She asked if he had been the one who had lifted the entire school on the first day. Izuku simply acknowledged it with a nod. After a few more conversations with the seniors, lunch began. Izuku sat with his group. Jiraiya asked what everyone thought of the upcoming rescue training. Izumi said it would be a great experience, especially because they would have a chance to train with some of the strongest students at UA. Momo nodded to agree, but before she could speak further, an alarm began to blare. The announcement warned of a level 3 security breach and advised all students to evacuate immediately in an orderly fashion. Panic spread as students rushed toward the exits. The instruction to evacuate calmly was forgotten in the scramble, and pushing in the crowd caused several students to be jostled and injured. Izuku scanned the chaotic scene and saw his friends being pushed around. He warned Shinso earlier about touching the core and now acted to restore order. A tense aura surged from him, freezing the crowd in place for a moment while he rose above them. The students looked up, alarmed at the intense presence and the glow in Izuku's eyes. He issued a stern reprimand, reminding them that they were UA students and needed to behave responsibly, evacuating calmly and following instructions. He emphasized that the alert required order, not panic, and commanded them to proceed in an organized manner. The students, unsettled by the sudden display and Izuku's firm direction, began to calm down and move toward the exits in a more orderly fashion. Izuku ordered everyone to look around and see how their actions had injured other students, and he instructed them to behave like UA students and take all the injured to the infirmary in an orderly manner. The others looked down in shame and complied. He landed beside some classmates who praised him, but he ignored them and walked to the window, where he saw the media arguing with Aizawa and Present Mike. Izuku muttered that the reporters needed a lesson, and his classmates looked confused. He smashed the window, his classmates gasped. He used his power to lift the reporters and sent them tumbling out of the campus, unharmed. He smiled at the result and told the stunned students that the reporters had paid for what they did. Ida immediately scolded him for his rude actions, but Izuku ignored him and walked back toward the class, the others following. Mirio asked if everyone was ready as he approached Class 1A standing in front of the bus. Momo replied that they were just waiting for Class 1B, and Mirio nodded. Hitoshi Shinso asked Izuku why he was wearing his P uniform instead of his hero costume. Izuku shrugged and said there was no reason. A blonde boy approached with the rest of Class 1B and their teacher, and Izuku stared at Monoma with an annoyed look. Jiro commented that Monoma seemed weird. Momo suggested they greet the other class, and she, Izumi, and Jiro walked toward Class 1B while Shinso and Izuku watched. Ida instructed everyone to board the bus in a single line with a strict gesture. Class 1B looked at him oddly and Class 1A exchanged nervous looks. Nijire told him there was no need to be so strict as she boarded the bus. Once everyone was aboard, the bus departed for the training site for their first rescue exercise. Izuku glanced around and saw that everyone was talking, while he and Todoroki sat quietly. Azui called for Yagi-san, which made Izumi turn toward her. Azui observed that Izumi's second quirk seemed similar to All Might's, and Izumi panicked as she searched for an answer. Izuku, aware that Izumi was the next holder of All Might's quirk and that the information could not be leaked, decided to step in. Izuku explained that although the quirks looked similar, there were key differences. Izumi's quirk could cause severe strain to her limbs, whereas All Might remained physically fine after prolonged use. They only appeared similar because both were physical enhancement quirks and because Izumi copied some of All Might's attacks. He leaned back while the others listened. Momo agreed that the usage differed, and Kirishima, showing his hardened arm, said his hardening did not stand out as much. Izumi nervously insisted that Kirishima was still very strong and knew how to use his quirk. Izuku then spoke up, saying that until someone had the strength and will to save others, it did not matter whether their quirk stood out. In their hearts, they were still heroes. His words surprised everyone. Shinso admitted he had not expected Izuku to be so motivating. Kirishima praised him with admiration. A ginger-haired girl named Kendo stepped in to stop Monoma before he could spout nonsense. Nijire looked at Izuku thoughtfully, then quickly turned away with a blush. Aizawa announced their arrival, and everyone disembarked and gathered in front of him and Vlad King. A voice then called out, and everyone turned. Izumi recognized the Space Hero 13, the top rescue hero, and the students buzzed with excitement at the prospect of learning from one of the best. Izumi and Uraraka approached 13 for an autograph. 13 invited everyone inside and promised they would be more amazed once they entered. The students followed her into the large dome called the Unforeseen Simulation Joint. Aizawa asked where All Might was, noting that he should have been present. 13 took the two teachers aside and spoke with them privately while Izuku chose not to eavesdrop and instead looked around. Nijire flew in front of the students and asked if they were excited for their first rescue training, and everyone nodded eagerly. Vlad King explained that All Might would not be able to join them, so he, Aizawa, Mirio, and Nijire would handle the training. Before 13 could continue, Izuku suddenly sprang toward the main plaza and warned that hostiles were incoming. The students were confused, but the teachers and top students sensed the seriousness in his voice. A purple portal opened in the main plaza. Aizawa ordered everyone to stay together and not move, instructing 13 and Nijire to evacuate the students while he, Vlad King, and Mirio confronted the villains. Kirishima asked what was happening. A student asked who they were. Nijire told everyone to calm down and insisted they needed to evacuate because those emerging from the portal were real villains. Hearing that, the entire class grew frightened. 13 and Nijire then guided everyone out of the building. Shinso asked what they should do about Izuku. 13 paused, turned, and saw Izuku heading toward them. 13 told the group that Izuku was coming back and urged everyone to keep moving and evacuate as quickly as possible. Izuku wondered why his teacher had sent him to evacuate when he felt he could have helped. He suspected the minor villains were manageable, but the real threat was the bioengineered creature that had been brought through the portal Anomu, a reinforced experiment designed to fight heroes with shock absorption, rapid regeneration, and immense power. A large purple mist then formed in front of them and condensed into the shape of a man in a suit. Kurojairi announced that there was no escape and introduced the League of Villains, taunting that this seemed a fitting place for the symbol of peace to meet his end. His words were cut short by a sound behind him. Izuku confronted Kurojairi. He moved faster than anyone expected, seizing the metal around Kurojairi's neck and throwing him into the ground with an explosive impact that shattered the platform and threw up dust. Everyone reflexively covered their faces. Nijire asked whether Izuku's quirk was related to speed or strength. Izumi explained that his quirk was similar to hers and was telekinetic in nature, not raw speed or super strength. Shinso reminded them that they had all been surprised on the first day, but that what they had seen was Izuku's physical strength in action. Kurojairi, baffled, asked how his weakness had been discovered so quickly. Izuku explained that he had noticed a gleam of metal under the mist. 13 acknowledged Shinso's role and advised that she should have been informed before taking direct action. Izuku nodded, and 13 stepped forward to confront Kurojairi, pointing at him. A loud crash distracted everyone. Dust cleared to reveal Vlad King lying motionless and badly injured on the ground. The students, except for 13 and Izuku, cried out for their teacher. Class 1B and Nijire ran to check on him, while Class 1A looked on in horror. Taking advantage of the distraction, Kurogiri teleported away. Purple mist enveloped the area and began swallowing people. In seconds, everyone except Izuku, 13, Nijire, Ochako, Kendo, and Momo was absorbed into the mist and teleported away by Kurogiri. Izuku gritted his teeth as he watched classmates and the other class disappear. Kurogiri announced that he had underestimated them earlier, but now their classmates had been scattered across the USJ to where other villains were waiting. He declared that the teachers had been defeated. In the central plaza, the Nomu had forced Aizawa and Mirio to the ground, pinning them and leaving them clearly hurt. Nijire and others reacted in horror. Anger rose in Izuku. His eyes took on a fierce intensity and a dark energy seemed to gather around him. His hands glowed with a red-tinged power. Kurogiri flinched at the glare. Izuku vanished from sight and reappeared behind Kurogiri, delivering another devastating strike that crushed the platform beneath them. Everyone watched with a mixture of fear and the faintest of hopes. Nijire and 13 wore serious expressions as Izuku stood and then disappeared again. In the central plaza, Shigaraki laughed at the sight of Aizawa and Mirio overwhelmed by his Nomu, taunting about who would save the students. Aizawa glared and silently urged All Might to come quickly. Before Aizawa could do more, the Nomu that had been holding him and Mirio was blown away, surprising Shigaraki. Izuku declared that it was time for the villains and their weapon to pay for what they had done. Shigaraki demanded to know how Izuku had managed that, clearly irritated and wary. He ordered the Nomu to attack, and the creature landed a heavy blow on Izuku that caused Aizawa to wince. Uraraka rushed forward, concerned about Aizawa's condition. Aizawa told her to run, but Uraraka refused to leave him. With the help of Kendo and Momo, she and the others lifted Aizawa to move him to safety, while Nijire and 13 carried Mirio away. Aizawa called out to Shernan as they retreated. Uraraka glanced back and was shocked by what she saw. Izuku had taken a direct hit from the Nomu and barely showed any damage, standing defiantly and glaring at the creature. Shigaraki froze as he realized Izuku had absorbed a strike that should have been devastating, and Izuku replied that if that was the Nomu's full power, it was pathetic. Izuku vowed to show what a true punch was like. He pet his hand back and struck Nomu with such force that the central plaza shattered around them. The entire USJ trembled as cracks raced across the grounds. Nomu took a devastating hit that left a large wound, but it began to regenerate almost immediately. Izuku remarked that it would be interesting to test Nomu's regeneration limit. He smirked in a way that sent a chill down Shigaraki's spine as the villain lay a short distance away. Izuku launched a barrage of punches before Nomu could fully recover. Each strike tore through Nomu's form and sent shockwaves through the facility, scattering debris and rattling the surrounding area. Nijire asked whether Nomu might possess an unusually strong strength quirk. Uraraka replied that, based on what Izuku and their teacher had said, he did not. Momo admitted that she was beginning to have doubts after witnessing the display. A little farther from the central plaza, Izumi, Azui, Bakugo, Todoroki, Mineta, Tokage, Tetsutetsu, Kirishima, and a few others watched in stunned silence. Mineta muttered that Nomu looked like a monster, wondering aloud how it could possess such raw power. Even Bakugo was left speechless. Izumi recalled Izuku's claim about being as strong as All Might, or even stronger, and found the scale of the destruction impossible to reconcile with what she knew of him. Izuku announced that it was time to end the fight and drew his arm back for a final, maximum-powered punch. Nijire shouted for everyone to take cover and hold onto something, and Izumi echoed the warning, urging the group to prepare for a powerful impact. Everyone followed the advice, clinging to nearby structures. Shigaraki's instincts flared and he tried to find shelter, but he was too late. Izuku's final punch released a massive shockwave that leveled much of the training ground and sent tremors across a wide area. The students and faculty hung on and managed to brace themselves. Shigaraki and several other villains were caught beneath falling debris and were buried around the USJ as dust settled over the scene. When the dust cleared, the double doors to the training facility burst open and All Might entered with the rest of the UA faculty, including Principal Nizu. Every teacher stared in horror at the devastation inside. All Might insisted that they must check whether the students were safe, and he moved to lead the effort immediately. Half an hour later, the students had been evacuated and many of the villains detained, but Izuku and two leading antagonists were still unaccounted for. Police were already searching for Izuku while injured personnel received treatment. Aizawa, Vlad King, and Mirio were transported to the hospital for serious injuries. All Might lamented that much of the chaos might have been avoided if he had not exhausted his power. Nizu agreed that regrets could wait and emphasized the need to inform parents and to find Izuku Shinron as quickly as possible. Midnight asked how so many students had escaped major harm despite the powerful shockwaves. Nizu admitted the same puzzlement and said they would get answers once the students spoke. 13 confirmed she was all right when Principal Nizu asked and agreed to give a full summary of the events. She then recounted everything that had happened at USJ. As she spoke, the faculty's expressions shifted from surprise to shock, then to horror, anger, and disbelief. Ectoplasm repeated the core of 13's account, clarifying that she was saying Izuku Shinron had caused the massive destruction during his fight with Nomu. The teachers looked at one another in stunned disbelief. Midnight pointed out that Izuku did not possess a strength quirk, so the scale of the damage made no sense. All Might found it difficult to accept. If Izuku were truly responsible, his physical strength would rival All Might's. Nizu suggested setting aside that question for the moment and focusing on finding Izuku, but before anyone could respond, a figure crashed into the ground nearby. When the dust cleared, Izuku Shinron stood among them carrying a preserved specimen from Nomu intended for evidence. Everyone's eyes widened and they quickly approached him to ask questions. Izuku apologized for his absence and explained that he had gone to retrieve the Nomu specimen so it could be used in the investigation, confirming that he had been the one who defeated Nomu. Detective Tsukachi asked to speak with Izuku for questioning, and Principal Nizu agreed. The detective and Izuku stepped aside from the others. Izuku told the detective that he had brought the specimen for the forensic team. Tsukachi reacted with visible shock at the sight of it, and Izuku explained that the piece came from Nomu but stressed that Nomu had not been alive. He added that Nomu was a bioengineered weapon created by the League of Villains to confront All Might, and that having the specimen would be valuable for the investigation. Tsukachi swallowed, nodded, and called a nearby forensic team member who carefully collected the specimen from Izuku for further analysis. Izuku told the detective that the man could ask whatever he wanted. The detective nodded and asked several questions, which Izuku answered. Izuku then gave his summary of the attack and the detective took notes. After a few more minutes, Izuku was allowed to return to class. Detective Tsukachi warned Izuku that he hoped the authorities would find Shigaraki first. Izuku's expression turned cold and his eyes flashed an intense red. Izuku warned Tsukachi that if he found Shigaraki, he would make him pay. Izuku left, and Tsukachi watched his back with wide eyes. At the faculty meeting, Principal Nizu asked Izuku to explain what had happened at the USJ. Izuku reported everything that occurred there. Nizu observed that Izuku's account matched those of his classmates and the Hero 13, but Nizu admitted he could not understand how so much destruction had happened without a physical enhancement quirk. Izuku stated plainly that the speed and strength he displayed were natural, and he left the room after Nizu informed him that his mother had been contacted and would arrive soon. Midnight asked if anyone thought Izuku was lying. Nizu replied that he did not. Izuku had answered with a serious tone and bluntness that suggested honesty rather than acting. Cementos asked what they would tell the public, and Nizu glanced at All Might before saying they would credit All Might with defeating the villains. Nizu explained that exposing Izuku's real name publicly would make him a target, and they could not risk endangering a rising hero. All Might and the others agreed. Outside the school building, Sonia hugged Izuku tightly, overwhelmed with relief after hearing he had been missing for over an hour during the attack. Sonia apologized for worrying so much. Izuku tapped his mother's shoulder to calm her. She noticed his condition and released him, apologizing again. Izuku reassured her that he was fine and thanked her for her concern. He suggested they go home for lunch together, offering a smile that brightened Sonya's mood. Sonya pointed out that Izuku's hair had changed again. Izuku checked his phone and exclaimed that it had changed again. Sonya scolded him gently for his language and he apologized playfully. They both laughed. As they prepared to leave the campus, Izuku sensed someone watching them and turned to see Nijire looking his way. Nijire blushed and hurried away, puzzled by the unexpected flutter in her chest. Later, Marcellus listened as Izuku recounted what had happened at the USA. Marcellus praised him for his resilience and asked how the absorption of the Dragon God core was progressing. Izuku reported that it was going very well and that the core had boosted his growth speed significantly. His status reflected tremendous power. He was a Dragon King titled the Red Dragon King, at level 370, with high attributes and considerable resources. After a few sparring sessions with Marcellus, Izuku returned to his world and the rest of the day passed uneventfully. Sonya took advantage of Izuku's 1-week leave from school to bring him to her dojo and introduce him to her students. Sonya explained that Izuku needed to make more friends since teamwork was essential in the hero field. Izuku grumbled but allowed her to proceed. Sonya mentioned, with a teasing grin, that her students were all girls and that dragons often attracted a lot of attention, which made Izuku blush and protest. At that moment, 4 girls entered the dojo in kendo attire carrying their bags. They placed their belongings in the locker area and stepped onto the wooden floor barefoot, bowing to Sonya in greeting. One of the students, Inko Fujiwara, asked who the newcomer was and noted that she thought Sonya only taught girls. Sonya introduced her son, Izuku. Sonya introduced Izuku to the group. Izuku Shernan let out an internal sigh and then gave his name while greeting everyone. Inko Fujiwara introduced herself with a nervous stammer. Haruka Shimizu followed with a quiet greeting. Naomi Takahashi offered a warm, teasing introduction. Sora Nakamura introduced herself with a cool, distant air that matched the cold aura Izuku sensed from her. Izuku's eyebrow twitched at Naomi's teasing remark, but he ignored it and focused on Sora. The door opened again and another group of 5 girls entered. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise when he recognized 2 of them. He registered Momo and Hato-senpai and reacted with audible surprise. Momo and Hato-senpai, equally surprised, called his name in return. Sonya asked if the 3 of them knew each other. Izuku explained to his mother that they all studied at UA. Momo was his classmate and Hato-senpai was his senior. Sonya smiled slyly at the connection, a grin Izuku deliberately ignored. Sonya then asked why he was there. Izuku pointed towards Sonya and indicated that this was his mother's dojo. Momo admitted she had suspected as much earlier, scratching her cheek at the coincidence, and Nijire asked whether Izuku would be studying kendo with them. Izuku clarified that he would be there as a teaching assistant. Once all the girls had arrived and introductions finished, Sonya began the class. She reminded everyone that the regional kendo championship was approaching and that each dojo could send 2 students. Sonya announced a selection test to determine who would represent the dojo. She revealed that whoever could beat Izuku in practice would earn the right to participate. Momo protested that the challenge was unfair. She and others found it hard to imagine anyone defeating Izuku. Nijire and a few others voiced similar doubts and curiosity about his strength. Sonya proposed that the students could team up in any numbers against Izuku and that knocking his bakudo from his hand would count as a win. Sonya suggested starting with Momo and Nijire. The 2 girls exchanged determined looks and agreed. They put on their gear, gripped their bakudo, and prepared to face Izuku, who took a bakudo from his mother's collection and stood before them without protective gear. Aika wondered aloud about the lack of protective equipment. Izuku indicated he did not need it, surprising the group and causing Sora to tighten her grip in response to his composed confidence. Sonya signaled the start. Momo and Nijire launched a coordinated attack at Izuku. He raised his bakudo with practiced ease and intercepted their strikes, moving with calm precision. Momo tried to exploit an opening with a swift strike toward the leg as Nijire aimed from above, but Izuku adjusted, bending back and redirecting his bakudo to intercept both threats. The observers noted his incredible reaction speed. Momo and Nijire created distance and regrouped. They executed a coordinated feint. Nijire initiated a vertical strike and used a flip to reposition, while Momo moved in from behind to move at the chest. Nijire followed with a strike toward the leg. The sequence was flawless and should have landed if Izuku had been an ordinary opponent. Sora, watching with a cold expression, noticed that Izuku's face showed no surprise, only calm and observation that set off a quiet alarm in her mind. Izuku assessed their formation and moved with a sudden, fluid precision. He avoided Momo's attack, parried her bakudo, and used his momentum to unbalance her. Momo stumbled and fell against Nijire as Nijire's strike redirected, and their coordinated assault dissolved in an instant. The entire exchange resolved in the blink of an eye, leaving Momo collapsed over Nijire and their bakudo on the floor. Izuku stood beside them, composed and ready, bakudo still in hand. The room filled with astonished expressions as everyone tried to process how quickly and cleanly the confrontation had ended. Even Sonia appeared taken aback. She had not previously seen Izuku spar with his sword and had not expected such refined technique. Recovering from her surprise, she acknowledged Izuku's victory and declared the match over. Naomi and the others reacted with disbelief, echoing the sentiment that no one could easily defeat him. Momo and Nijire rose and accepted the outcome with a mixture of frustration and admiration. Sonia approached them and praised their effort, reminding them that there would always be someone stronger and that they should be proud of their teamwork and execution. Izuku complimented the final attack as having had a flawless execution, which drew surprised smiles from both girls. They admitted that, while their strategy had been technically sound, it had not been effective against him this time. Sonia noted that none of them had managed to put a scratch on Izuku. Izuku replied that flawless execution did not guarantee victory and that against opponents who were far stronger, a failsafe was always necessary. Though his words sounded arrogant to some, those who knew his real ability recognized the truth. Sonia then asked who wanted to go next. Naomi volunteered to go with Aika, Haruka, and Sora. Sora immediately said she wanted a one-on-one match with Izuku, so Naomi raised an eyebrow and agreed. Naomi declared that she and her friends would be next and added a playful challenge that would stand if they won. Sonia and the others chuckled at the exchange. Haruka urged the three of them forward, and they took their stances while Izuku stood calmly before them, his eyes scanning their positions. Sonia called for the match to begin. Haruka struck first, closing the distance in an instant and launching an upward slash aimed at Izuku's chin. Izuku bent his head to avoid the blow and then, when Naomi moved in with a low strike, he backflipped aside. Naomi smirked and made a brief teasing remark, but Izuku ignored it and refocused on Aika as she closed the gap. Aika began with a downward strike that Izuku easily dodged, then immediately switched to a horizontal attack that caught him by surprise. He jumped back and avoided the blow, but Naomi then aimed for his wrist. Izuku evaded again, and Aika, already behind him, reacted to Naomi's move by aiming for his back. Izuku caught that attack with his bakuto, which left his front exposed. Haruka seized the chance and targeted his gut with a pinpoint strike. Izuku smirked and backflipped, landing behind Aika just before Haruka's attack could connect. Naomi intercepted the blow and saved Aika from a heavy hit. Aika muttered that it had been a dirty move. Izuku only kept his smirk. Izuku moved to finish the exchange, suddenly appearing in front of the three girls with explosive speed that left them unprepared. He disarmed all three, knocking the bakudos from their hands. Sonia declared Izuku the winner of the match, and the girls sighed. Haruka admitted she had expected the result, and Aika conceded that they had lasted longer than she thought. Naomi teased that perhaps Izuku had gone easy on them because he had been distracted by their appearance. Izuku's eye twitched at the comment, and he tapped Naomi on the head with his bakuto in response. Naomi complained loudly about being hit and pouted, but the tension was quickly quelled when Sonia told them to calm down. The three sat back down and Sora rose to take her turn. Sora approached with a serious expression. At first she had assumed Izuku was merely an arrogant kid who thought kendo alone made him unbeatable, but after watching his earlier matches she admitted to herself that she was impressed. She still intended to end his win streak. They took their stances and Sonia signaled the start. Sora closed the gap at once and struck at Izuku's shoulder, but he intercepted with his bakudo. She kept pressing, targeting his leg and other weak points, her attacks relentless. Izuku blocked each strike, then stepped back to reassess. He praised her speed, which surprised Sora for a moment, but when he added that she was fast compared to others, her temper flared and she renewed her assault. Sora launched a barrage of strikes from every direction, testing his defenses. Izuku observed that he had no blind spots and wondered if she was trying to overwhelm him with quantity. She did not answer verbally, she simply increased the intensity of her strikes. At one point she feinted a vertical blow and shifted her grip midair before hurling the bakudo toward his chest at high speed. Izuku intercepted it without breaking his calm demeanor. Sora studied his untroubled expression and felt frustration. She had trained in kendo since she was 5, practicing every day for 11 years and winning several championships. She knew her own skill and could not understand why Izuku appeared so relaxed when facing her. The only explanation that occurred to her was that his quirk might grant a passive physical advantage, but she dismissed that thought because if it were true, her sensei Sonya would have mentioned it or arranged the match differently. That left only one conclusion. What she was witnessing were the results of Izuku's natural physical ability, his composed expression, lightning-fast reflexes, and exceptional agility. Even though she knew she could not beat someone like him, Sora did not stop trying because that was what her sensei Sonya had taught her, to never give up. In the middle of the match, Izuku noted how determined she was despite the clear power gap. Sora replied that she had been taught to never give up. Izuku smiled and glanced at his mother, who watched with a proud smile as her student fought. Izuku decided to end the match. In a swift, precise motion he disarmed Sora, then swept her legs so she fell back onto the mat. He kept his bakudo steady and ended the bout cleanly. Izuku acknowledged that it had been a fine match. Momo and Nijire remarked on the incredible striking speed on display. Sonya announced Izuku as the winner. Izuku studied Sora for a moment, then stepped to stand beside his mother. Sora rose and took her place among the other students. When Haruka asked Sonya what would happen next, Sonya explained that she had already selected the 2 students to represent the dojo, Aika and Naomi. The class reacted with mild surprise that Sora had not been chosen. Sonya clarified that she wanted to give other students a chance to participate in the upcoming tournament, and that Sora and the rest of the students would continue training for the Bushido Championship, whose selection round would take place in 2 months. Everyone, including Sora, nodded, and Sora grew more determined to become stronger. Izuku watched the group and let out a small, curious smile. He wondered how his mother's students would fare in the months ahead. Later, Izuku entered the classroom with a loud greeting that drew surprised looks. Shinso asked whether he had hit his head, and Izuku, a little annoyed, said he had only been trying to be friendly before taking his seat. The bell rang and the students settled. The door opened to reveal Aizawa, appearing wrapped in bandages and clearly fatigued. Ida adjusted his glasses and worried about Aizawa's condition. Aizawa brusquely replied that there was more to discuss. Their fight was not over yet. The class went quiet and tensed. Izuku wore an unreadable expression as he sensed rising fear among his classmates. Aizawa announced that the school sports festival would take place in 2 weeks. Jiraiya voiced concern about holding such a large event so soon after the recent villain attack. Aizawa acknowledged the risk but explained that the HPSC had decided to continue with the festival to show society and the villains that the hero community would not back down. Izuku's eyes narrowed and his presence shifted. An intense aura seemed to settle over him and the room. He apologized for interrupting and told Aizawa to continue. Aizawa reminded them that many pro heroes would be watching the festival and that a strong performance could open opportunities. He also assured the students that security would be 5 times greater than last year's and noted, without elaboration, that they had Shernon among them, whose presence they could not ignore. Izuku offered a reassuring smile to his classmates. Aizawa concluded by telling them they had 2 weeks to focus on training and left the classroom. The bell rang and the day continued. Class 1A turned their attention to the upcoming festival, trying to focus on positive goals. Mina asked if everyone was pumped up, and Ochako suddenly radiated a fierce competitive determination, declaring she would do her best and pumping her fist as the others cheered. Izuku stepped out of the classroom and found his two senpais waiting. Nijire greeted him warmly, and Mirio invited him to walk with them. Mirio then bowed and apologized for what had happened at USJ, taking responsibility as a senpai for the failures of that day. Izuku insisted that Mirio did not need to apologize. Mirio reflected that none of them were invincible and that defeat was something everyone had to face in order to grow stronger. He told Izuku that even though he had not been able to defeat the villains, he had done his best to protect everyone, and that was what mattered most. Izuku placed a hand on Mirio's shoulder and calmly told him that, thankfully, no one had been harmed, but the incident proved he needed to become stronger and he hoped Mirio would not give up. Mirio answered with determination that he was grateful and agreed he needed to grow stronger to save 1,000,000 lives, a fire of resolve in his eyes that made both Izuku and Nijire smile. Nijire thanked Izuku for saving everyone at USJ, and Izuku shook his head before explaining that a hero would not ignore people in trouble and that, as friends, it had been his duty to protect them. Mirio told Izuku that he was sure Izuku would become a great hero one day, and Izuku smiled at the encouragement. Nijire, fidgeting with her fingers, asked Izuku if he would like to have training sessions together for the upcoming sports festival. Izuku replied that he did not mind helping, and Nijire brightened and reached for his hand. Izuku, not used to that level of closeness, felt unexpectedly flustered. Nijire suggested holding their first session that weekend, and Izuku agreed. Mirio announced that they would be taking their leave, and Izuku nodded before the three parted. After separating, Izuku walked back to his classroom with a small blush and a hand over his chest as his heart raced faster than usual. He wondered if his rapid heartbeat had been caused by her touch. Later, after school, Mina picked up her bag and complained that she was finally finished for the day. Kaminari's voice drew everyone's attention to a crowd blocking the gate. Ida looked over the gathered students and asked why they were all there. Bakugo shoved through the crowd, dismissing them as extras and forcing his way out. Izuku glanced at the crowd, then moved back into the classroom and opened a window before leaping out, which prompted gasps from his classmates. He walked toward the main gate completely fine and muttered that he had no patience for people who only knew how to shout, his eye briefly taking on a deep crimson glow as he headed for the exit. In another place, Izuku sparred with Marcellus in a dance of blades. Marcellus explained that their sports festival was similar to a tournament meant to show warriors' abilities, and he asked Izuku about his progress with the Dragon Core. Izuku reported that his progress was going well and that he had a plan to shorten the time needed to fully absorb the core. Marcellus praised the work and urged Izuku to continue improving so he could become one of the strongest. As they tested each other's skill, Marcellus warned that tensions were rising with the neighboring Magma Kingdom, whose ruler held the same title, Red Dragon King. Two dragons could not share the same title, and Marcellus suggested Izuku keep himself available. There might be an urgent need to call him. He advised Izuku to grow overwhelmingly strong to face the other Dragon King, who carried centuries of experience. Izuku listened attentively and nodded, dodging another strike as their sparring continued in a swift, stylized clash. The next morning, Izuku muttered about his mother asking him to leave earlier than planned for the training session with Nijire. When he arrived at their meeting spot, he found Nijire already there, thoughtful. He greeted her and learned she had not been waiting long. They set off toward the nearby forest where Izuku liked to train. It was the place of his old home that he visited from time to time. Nijire remarked on how large the forest was, and Izuku scanned the surroundings as they entered. They reached a large clearing and Izuku suggested it as their training spot. Nijire smiled and said it was a great place, then asked why he kept calling her senior, insisting that she was his friend and asking him to call her by her name. Izuku agreed and, with a small smile, proposed they begin. Izuku first observed Nijire using her quirk and analyzed her technique, then offered tips to improve. He suggested a sparring exercise in which he would serve as a moving target for Nijire to aim at with her quirk. Her agility and focus made the exercise challenging for her, but she pushed herself and kept trying until Izuku could see her determination. After that, they practiced hand-to-hand combat without quirks. Izuku dominated the drills but offered constructive advice throughout to help Nijire develop. He watched her determination continually push her forward. After about 3 hours of training, both of them were exhausted but satisfied. Nijire breathed heavily and remarked that the session had been intense, and Izuku agreed that it had been necessary. Izuku reminded Nijire that no one could know what the future held, and that was why it was necessary to have the strength to face unexpected situations. Nijire nodded, stood, and they began walking back together, exchanging casual conversation. Nijire shyly asked if Izuku had a crush. Izuku answered that he did not. Nijire clenched her fist briefly to hide the happiness she felt. She had already accepted her feelings for him and admired his kind heart, even if he often appeared cold and arrogant. Izuku noted that they had reached the spot where they would part. Nijire asked when they would have their next session, and Izuku said they could decide that later. After a few moments of lingering looks, they said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. Izuku later asked Marcellus if he really intended to come, surprised by the confirmation. Marcellus yawned from his ice throne and explained that it would be a good opportunity to explore Izuku's world and see the strength of its youths. Izuku agreed and offered to introduce him to his mother. Izuku clicked his fingers and opened a portal. Marcellus grinned and teleported beside him. They stepped through together. Marcellus was the first to step out, with Izuku following. Izuku pointed out his room, and Marcellus used his sharp senses to take in every small detail. Marcellus asked about the picture of All Might, and Izuku explained that it was All Might, their symbol of peace and Izuku's idol. Sonia, who had heard voices, opened the door and froze at the sight of Marcellus. Izuku introduced Marcellus as his friend and ally, and Sonia, reassured by Izuku's presence, greeted their visitor politely. Marcellus returned the greeting. Sonia suggested that since it was Marcellus's first time in this world, he should be shown around while she prepared lunch. Izuku agreed, and Marcellus nodded. They vanished together, surprising Sonia, who sighed and set about making lunch. Outside, Marcellus observed how bright and peaceful the world felt compared to his own. Izuku confirmed that his world was far calmer than the world of dragons. They walked while Izuku explained the sights that fascinated Marcellus. Haruka and Momo approached, and Izuku greeted them. Marcellus watched curiously as Izuku introduced him to his cousins, explaining that he was showing Marcellus around. Haruka and Momo stepped forward and greeted Marcellus politely. Marcellus returned their greeting with a smile, and Izuku maintained his stoic expression. Haruka and Momo explained that they had been on their way to Izuku's house to discuss something with Sensei. Izuku wished them well and did not hold them up. As they parted, Marcellus teased with a knowing smirk that Izuku was already showing interest in the girls, which made Izuku sigh and try to move the conversation along. Marcellus kept teasing as they continued their walk. When Izuku mentioned the upcoming sports festival, Marcellus learned it would be the next day and decided to accompany Izuku's mother to the stadium, admitting he was not good with directions. Izuku raised an eyebrow and they resumed their walk. The next scene found Izuku and his classmates in the Class 1A waiting room, preparing for the sports festival. Shinso asked how Izuku was feeling. Izumi suggested that Izuku was more likely excited than nervous. Izuku said he did not feel nervous when he believed he knew the outcome. Shinso warned that Izuku's comments had sounded more arrogant lately and that such attitudes could draw negative attention if he was not careful. Izuku dismissed the concern as a matter of confidence and closed his eyes, unconcerned. Their friends watched him with a mix of concern and curiosity. Mina remarked that she would have preferred to wear her hero costume rather than the PE uniform. The class reminded her that the uniform rule was necessary to keep the event fair. Tokoyami explained that if they all wore PE uniforms it would level the playing field, since hero costumes gave some students advantages over others. Sato wondered aloud what the first event would be, brimming with excitement. Kirishima agreed. Everyone quieted when Ida and Momo entered the room. Momo announced that they would be entering soon and hoped everyone was ready. The class nodded eagerly while Bakugo grinned. Izuku stood up at Momo's words and said it was time to get things going. Todoroki then called to him by his nickname, Shernan. Izuku glanced at Todoroki and asked what he wanted. raising an eyebrow. Their classmates fell silent as the two stood face to face. Todoroki declared that he intended to beat Izuku no matter how strong he was, openly challenging him and earning shocked gasps. Kaminari noted the surprise at their two strongest friends challenging each other. Kirishima stepped in and put a hand on Todoroki's shoulder, asking why he was picking a fight when they were supposed to be friends. Todoroki pushed Kirishima's hand away and kept his gaze locked on Izuku, saying that he was there to win, not to make friends, then walked toward the door. Izuku's heavy voice stopped Todoroki and raised the tension in the waiting room as he warned Todoroki not to be foolish. He questioned whether Todoroki really expected to win when he did not use all his strength, and warned him not to underestimate opponents who could defeat him effortlessly. Todoroki's eyes narrowed while other classmates swallowed nervously. Bakugo grinned at the rising tension. Izuku took 2 steps forward, tilted his head, and fixed Todoroki with an intense stare, reminding him to know the line between foolishness and boldness and to be careful not to be taken out early. With that, Izuku left the waiting room, leaving the others still for a few moments before Present Mic began the festival introductions. Momo called for everyone to hurry, and the students walked toward the field where the events would take place. Outside in the stadium, Present Mic announced with booming enthusiasm that this was the day they had all been waiting for, the UA Sports Festival where quirks would collide and dreams would ignite. He introduced Class 1A as the battle-tested trailblazers who had stood tall against danger and asked the crowd to put their hands together for them. Izuku entered the stadium with a calm expression, scanning the stands and smiling when he saw his mother and Marcellus. Bakugo followed, barely containing his excitement as small explosions popped in his hand. Todoroki walked behind them with a colder, intense gaze. The rest of the classes followed, led by Momo Yaoyorozu and Izumi, both a little nervous. Present Mic continued by introducing Class 1B and their determined leader Kendo, calling them the underestimated Storm Riders. Kendo led her class with a focused expression and the rest marched out ready to carve their own legend. He then introduced General Studies, Classes C through E, as the thinkers and observers who might surprise the audience, followed by support course classes F through H, highlighted as inventors and gadgeteers with Hatsum spinning into view with a prototype. Finally, he introduced business course classes I through K, the tacticians who moved with subtle, calculated purpose. Present Mic concluded that UA's first-year firepower had assembled on the legendary field and urged everyone to get the festival started. Aizawa muttered something and adjusted his bandages. The stadium glowed with excitement as Midnight, radiant and theatrical in her deep purple attire, stepped onto the ceremonial platform with a confident stride. She raised the microphone and explained that tradition required a pledge and that the student making it had a record-breaking entrance exam score. She announced proudly that with a score of 184 points, surpassing All Might's record, the pledge would be given by Izuku Shirnan of Class 1A. Cheers erupted and the stands buzzed. All Might watched from the audience and smiled faintly, his expression contemplative. Izuku walked forward with quiet gravity, his uniform pristine and his stance steady. He looked across the arena once before taking the microphone and explained that he would begin his speech by addressing a reality most people ignored. He asked the crowd who they thought the real villain of the world was, the villains, the heroes, or society itself. Murmurs spread through the stadium. Some members of the crowd responded that villains were the obvious answer, saying they caused destruction and harm, and others added that villains were simply evil. Comments about proper punishment echoed throughout the stadium as people responded to Izuku, who stood silently on the stage. Izuku countered with a single word, telling them they were wrong. He argued that the real problem and the true villains of this world were not the people labeled as villains but the society that created and pushed them down that path. He said that in the present era many had forgotten what humanity meant, and that in this world only one thing seemed to matter, quirks. If someone had a quirk, they belonged. If they did not, they were treated as useless. He continued that even when a person did have a quirk, their fate and worth were judged solely by its perceived potential and characteristics. He insisted that before a child with a so-called villain-like quirk could take a single step toward becoming a hero, society had already shunned him, branding his existence as a threat when he was just a child who wanted to help others. Several people turned away in shame at those words, while a few tried to protest and were silenced by Izuku's stare. Marcellus watched calmly from his seat and Sonia clenched her hands as she listened to her son. All Might rose to intervene as Izuku entered increasingly dangerous territory, but Principal Nizu stopped him with a gentle motion. Izuku accused parents of abandoning their own children because they lacked a quirk or had a quirk society deemed villainous, forcing them into hunger and exile instead of helping them. He condemned parts of the hero society for contributing to the cycle, by pushing people toward becoming villains and then blaming them when havoc followed. He clarified that he did not mean every hero, but pointed out that some became heroes for money, ignored the pleas of the weak, and used their authority and strength to impose their will. After a brief breath, Izuku reminded everyone that discrimination based on quirks would perpetuate the cycle of heroes and villains. He said that until society stopped judging people by their quirks, the label of villain would remain attached to too many lives, and that change was a choice the crowd had to make. He glanced at his mother. She looked at him with concern, but there was a quiet glint of pride in her eyes. Before moving on, Izuku addressed Todoroki and proposed including the entire first year in their confrontation, challenging the scope of the competition. Shoto narrowed his eyes as he looked at Izuku. The crowd watched him closely and Endeavor in the stands glared. Izuku produced 2 bracelets from his pockets and explained that each weighed 1,500 pounds. To prove it, he dropped one. The bracelet struck the stage without bouncing, cracking the platform beneath it and sending a spiderweb of fractured concrete outward. Dust rose and gasps spread through the stadium. Even Bakugo flinched. Shoto's eyes widened and several classmates stared in stunned silence. Izuku indicated Principal Nizu when he clarified that his quirk was telekinesis, not a physical enhancement. Nizu nodded, and the stadium erupted into confusion and disbelief. Izuku smirked and announced that he would wear both bracelets for the event and rely solely on his physical strength, foregoing the use of his quirk. With that, Izuku leapt from the damaged stage. Present Mike, recovered from his shock, declared that the sports festival had just become serious. After the maintenance crew repaired the platform and order was restored, Midnight returned to her position and instructed everyone to get back on the track. She produced a floating digital wheel that glowed with neon segments, each labeled with a different challenge. With a poised gesture, she set the wheel spinning. The crowd watched as it slowed and stopped, the golden segment revealing the chosen event, the obstacle race. Midnight announced the obstacle race as a classic test of speed, strategy, and survival, and said they were raising the stakes this year. She explained that all first-year classes would participate, including Hero Course, General Studies, Support, and Business 11 classes and hundreds of students running one course. A holographic map of the stadium perimeter flickered into view as she gestured, the course tracing a jagged path around the circumference. She noted that the track spanned approximately 7 kilometers, and the competitors realized the challenge that lay ahead. Midnight explains that the course wraps around the stadium's outer edge, weaving through terrain designed to test reflexes, quirks, and creativity. The students murmur among themselves at the prospect of 7 kilometers of obstacles that will challenge more than speed. Midnight's eyes gleam as she tells them the rule: stay on the course. She emphasizes that they are otherwise free to use any tactic: fly, crawl, teleport, or sabotage so long as they do not stray from the path. A ripple of excitement and anxiety passes through the crowd. Midnight widens her smile and reminds them to use their quirks, brains, and friends, while noting that only the top 42 will advance. She cracks her whip, the sound slicing the air, and commands everyone to take their positions. Class 1A surges forward together, led by Izumi and Momo with determination on their faces. Izuku stands calm and observant, a faint smirk as his eyes scan the competitors. Bakugo stalks beside him, fierce and focused. Shoto moves with quiet precision, his breath already misting with cold. From Class 1B, Monoma smirks and whispers to his teammates while Kendo offers quiet encouragement. Support students adjust gear, some strap on exosuits, others check gadgets, and business students look nervous but resolved. Midnight watches the students assemble beside the wide tunnel entrance, its floor lined with pressure sensors and countdown lights. She reminds them that this is not just a race but a statement of what they are made of and why they deserve to be here. The lights above the tunnel flicker to green, then yellow, then red, and midnight gives the signal to start. The tunnel explodes with motion. Hundreds of students surge forward in a chaotic tide of color and energy. The narrow entrance becomes a bottleneck as elbows clash, quirks flare, and shouts echo. Students shout for each other to move and watch their footing. Ice suddenly spreads across the tunnel floor, freezing dozens of feet in place. Shoto glides past, his movements calm as he explains that he needs to move ahead. Bakugo blasts into the air, explosions propelling him over the frozen crowd as he orders people to get out of his way. Izumi uses her quirk to slip free of the ice and moves forward. Momo Yaoyorozu conjures a pole vault mid-run and flips elegantly over the chaos while Aoyama fires his laser to propel himself with a glittering arc. Support students activate hoverboards, grappling hooks, and spring-loaded boots. One student from General Studies liquefies and slips through the crowd like water. Shoto frowns at how many students escaped his ice, then turns his attention to Bakugo, who is charging up behind him. Shoto sends multiple ice shards as a defensive measure. Bakugo destroys them with explosive blasts. Izumi arrives behind them and makes clear that she also refuses to accept defeat. Present Mike draws everyone's attention back to the starting line with a shout. He points out that Izuku is still standing calmly with his hand in his pocket. Midnight asks if he will participate now, and Izuku indicates that he will join, but not yet. He is waiting for the right moment. On the track ahead, the first hurdle reveals itself, the Robo Inferno. Present Mike announces that the robots are the zero-pointers used in the Hero Course entrance exam. General Studies students react with disbelief and anxiety at facing such machines. Denki groans at the sight of the zero-pointers, while Shoto studies the robots with a cool appraisal before releasing a huge wave of ice that freezes several units at once. Other students watch in awe at the overwhelming power he displays. Announcers and spectators remark on Shoto Todoroki's decisive action, noting that he seems to be the son of a top pro hero. Endeavor, who has come to observe his son, scoffs from the sidelines. Bakugo, high above the robots, screams that he will not be left behind and calls out to blast his way through. A student spots a gap and the crowd follows his lead, attempting to pass between the legs of the frozen robots. Shoto cautions that he froze the robots in an unstable position on purpose. As he finishes, one of the frozen zero-pointers topples, threatening the students beneath it. Kirishima braces himself and hardens his body to protect a group of students, but before the impact lands, Izumi surges into position with her hand outstretched and her expression fierce. She halts the falling robot and prevents several students from being pinned. She then urges everyone to move to safety, and the students rush forward, offering brief thanks as they pass. Kirishima acknowledges her with a thumbs up and she allows the robot to fall to the ground with a loud, non-graphic thud. She takes off again to catch up with the rest of the field. Momo announces that she will not be left behind and creates a projectile that she uses to take out another robot's head, clearing the way for those behind her. The crowd cheers as students begin to clear the first obstacle. Teachers and pro-heroes comment on the combination of strategy, strength, and teamwork on display. The competition presses. Snipe observed that most of the students who had cleared the first obstacles were from Class 1A and Class 1B as he watched the event with the other teachers. Cementos agreed, noting that their status as hero classes and their first-hand experience with the earlier villain attack made that outcome unsurprising. On the racing track, Shoto reached the second obstacle, a bottomless pit with widely spaced platforms connected by long, narrow ropes that looked barely strong enough for a few students. Present Mike announced that this was the second obstacle, the fall, and explained that a fall meant elimination. Shoto immediately stepped onto a rope and began to slide along it by forming ice beneath him. Bakugo bypassed the trap altogether by blasting himself over it with controlled explosions. Izumi arrived at the fall and used her quirk to fly through as well. Present Mike noted that the first 3 students had already conquered the second obstacle and were approaching the third. Shoto came to the third obstacle and took in the large danger signs marking the field as a minefield. Present Mike described this final challenge and explained that the mines were set up so careful observation would reveal them. They were game-safe and not powerful, but loud and flashy enough to intimidate competitors. Aizawa leaned forward, watching Izumi, Shoto, and Bakugo, and reflected that the main purpose of this obstacle was to slow the leaders and give those behind a chance to catch up. Shoto moved cautiously through the minefield, scanning for explosive devices and refraining from using his ice because his body temperature had dropped below optimal. He planned to get across by hand for now and then use his ice once he recovered. Bakugo also advanced carefully, grumbling about the placement of the obstacle and knowing he could not afford to use his quirk here. Izumi smirked at their struggle, activated her ability, and began crossing with confidence. Bakugo refused to let them win easily, and Shoto likewise refused to yield to Izuku. Shoto launched shards of ice that Izumi dodged. She then used her quirk to try to unbalance him, and Shoto countered by stabilizing himself with ice. Present Mike observed that a contest had begun among the top three, and other students were beginning to reach the third obstacle. Momo quickly produced a jetpack to help herself cross. Other students relied on their senses or quirks and advanced at their own paces. Izumi cleared the minefield and headed toward the tunnel that led to the finish line. Bakugo and Shoto continued to push each other, attempting to sabotage one another while moving as quickly as possible. At the starting line, Izuku crouched into a running stance. Present Mike called attention to it, and the crowd reacted with skepticism and mockery. Sonia heard the taunts and clutched her skirt, but Marcellus reassured her that the spectators would quiet down once Izuku began to move. Suddenly a powerful blast erupted beneath Izuku. The ground burst outward with a shockwave that rippled through the tunnel, sending dust and debris into the air. Present Mike announced in surprise that Shernon had launched himself from the starting line and that the ground had been disrupted. The crowd gasped. Teachers leaned forward, Cementos blinked. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. Sonia smiled and held her skirt more tightly. Marcellus smirked, confident that he had been right. Izuku vanished in a blur. He tore through the course faster than the eye could follow, the air rippling around him. Training obstacles hunched and loomed ahead, students screamed, ducked, and scrambled for cover. Izuku did not dodge the defenses the way others would have. He ran straight through. One training robot was struck and sent spinning aside. Another was lifted and hurled off its position. Present Mike reacted that Shernon had smashed through the first obstacle without even using his quirk. Platforms over a bottomless pit shuddered as a sonic boom accompanied Izuku's speed. Ropes snapped behind him from the force of his passage, and the wind nearly knocked other competitors off balance. The final obstacle, the minefield, erupted in a series of loud detonations that chased the blur across the course. Izuku kept running without flinching. Each step triggered blasts that could not catch him. The shockwave washed over the students, rocking them and causing several to lose control. Momo's jetpack spun out of control, Aoyama's visual display stuttered, and many students shielded their eyes. Shoto watched with wide eyes and noted that Izuku did not appear to be trying to avoid the explosions. Others in the crowd interpreted the act as showmanship, believing that he was deliberately demonstrating his speed. Bakugo clenched his teeth and muttered under his breath as Izuku surged past them both. Izumi hovered just meters from the finish line, hand outstretched and breath steady, having flown through the course with grace and power. Then the wind shifted. A blur tore past her and the shockwave hit like a wall. Her hair whipped back and her eyes widened. When she blinked, Izuku was already ahead. The finish line sensors burst into sparks, and then the arena fell silent for a heartbeat before Present Mike reacted in disbelief, announcing that Izuku Shernon had blown through all three obstacles and taken first, passing Izumi Yagi at the last second. The crowd erupted into cheers, gasps, and screams. Teachers leaned forward, stunned by Izuku's performance. Students still in the minefield froze, astonished. One student remarked that Izuku had passed Todoroki, Bakugo, and Izumi, as others murmured that what they had just seen was more than speed. Izuku slowed to a walk, steam rising from his shoulders, breathing calm and eyes steady. He turned slightly and offered Izumi a quiet nod. Izumi hovered, hands still outstretched. After a moment she sighed and smiled. In the stands, Sonia wiped a tear from her cheek while Marcellus chuckled and murmured to himself that Izuku definitely seemed like a dragon. The final students crossed the finish line, panting, bruised, and exhilarated. A massive digital screen above the arena flickered to life and cast a soft glow over the crowd. Midnight stepped forward onto the polished stage. She raised her whip and cracked it once, the sharp snap drawing everyone's attention. She announced to the stadium that the first round of the UA Sports Festival had officially ended. Midnight directed attention to the scoreboard and introduced the top performers. The screen displayed the rankings with Izuku Shinran in first, Izumi Yagi second, Shoto Todoroki third, Katsuki Bakugo fourth, Momo Yaoyorozu fifth, and so on up to 42. Midnight congratulated the top 5 and the 42 students who had earned their place in the second round. The crowd roared again, but not everyone was pleased. Katsuki Bakugo stood to the side, fists clenched and smoke curling from his palms, glaring at the scoreboard with a tight jaw. He muttered that he would not lose to Izuku again. Shoto Todoroki observed with a cool gaze and noted that Izuku's performance had not only been a victory but a humiliation. He wondered how someone could move like that without a physical quirk. Bakugo scoffed and insisted he did not care what it was, he would not be defeated again. Shoto offered no answer, turning away as he silently calculated. Away from the tension, Izuku stood quietly with steam still rising from his shoulders, glancing at the scoreboard before studying his own hands. He admitted to himself that he had not intended to push so hard, that he had simply wanted to make a statement. Izumi approached with a gentle smile and told him that he had done more than make a statement. He had been incredible, passing her at the last second in a way she had not even seen coming. Momo joined them, her jetpack humming softly, agreeing warmly and blushing as she noted how much Izuku's run had shocked everyone, even the support students. Izuku felt awkward with the praise and thanked them, saying he had wanted to show what he could do. Izumi nudged him playfully and warned that first place came with a target on his back. Momo laughed and suggested he get used to the spotlight. Izuku explained that this was why he had pushed himself, glancing toward his mother, who watched from the stands with a proud smile. Midnight cracked her whip again and commanded everyone's attention. The digital wheel from earlier reappeared, hovering in the air with a soft hum. Midnight introduced the second round and spun the wheel, which slowed and stopped on a gold-lit segment. She revealed that the second round would be a battle royale. 42 students dropped into a massive arena filled with forests, ruins, rivers, and traps. Midnight explained that participants would be dropped at random points and that the objective was survival. To eliminate an opponent, a student needed to wrap a white tape around them. The last 16 standing would move on to the third round. The students reacted with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Midnight encouraged them to use their quirks, their brains, and their instincts, reminding them that the round would test power, strategy, and heart. She said teams and cooperation were allowed but warned that backstabbing was a possibility. Only Sonia noticed when Izuku's eye twitched at the mention of backstabbing. An old memory flickered across his expression for a moment before he suppressed it. Midnight cracked her whip one final time and announced that the battle royale would begin in 15 minutes. As the students dispersed to rest and prepare, Izuku stood watching the arena map. Izumi joined him, thoughtful, reflecting on the upcoming battle royale. Izuku thought the upcoming match was going to be intense and nodded, staying silent as he quietly observed the floating digital screen of the arena. Momo approached, holding a tablet that likely contained terrain data. Izuku noted that it looked like Momo had already begun planning. Momo shrugged and said she liked to be ready. Izuku looked at Izumi and Momo as they began to talk among themselves, then let his gaze drift to his mother in the stands, who wore a proud maternal smile. Izuku admitted quietly that he did not know what was coming, but he intended to win. A chill ran down Momo's and Izumi's spines at his determination. Izumi managed a nervous smile and told him she was glad he was so determined. After the 15-minute break, students gathered again near the center of the arena, their chatter quieting as Midnight stepped forward with a confident smile. The sun had shifted slightly overhead, casting long shadows across the polished stage. Beside her stood a strange device, a podium with a glowing red button on top. its base shimmering faintly and humming with quiet energy. Midnight cracked her whip to draw attention and announced that it was time to introduce something special. She indicated the podium and explained that it was Yue's newest invention, a short-range teleporter developed under the guidance of Principal Nizu. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The digital map behind her flickered to life, showing forests, rivers, ruins, and traps. Midnight explained that each student would step up and press the red button, which would instantly teleport them to a random coordinate inside the battlefield. She added that there was a chance 2 students would land in the same spot and cautioned everyone to be ready for surprises. Izuku's eyes narrowed as he absorbed every word. Beside him, Izumi shifted nervously and Momo tapped her tablet while cross-referencing terrain zones. Kaminari blinked at the podium and asked if they were just going to disappear. Jiru gave him a sideways glance and confirmed that was the idea. Siro commented that it was kind of like a game respawn. Midnight reminded them that this was a game with no extra lives. Bakugo scoffed from the back and declared that random drop points would not matter because he intended to crush whoever was closest. Shoto remained silent, his gaze fixed on the glowing button. Midnight stepped aside and instructed the students to line up and go one by one. The line formed quickly, tension rising with each step forward. The first student, a boy from Class 1B, pressed the button and vanished in a flash of light. The podium announced that the teleport had been successful. Izumi leaned toward Izuku and observed that this was really happening. Izuku told her to stay sharp. Momo smiled and said they would meet again in the top 16. One by one, students vanished in bursts of light, some with nervous glances and others with confident smirks. The crowd watched as the battlefield filled with scattered warriors. When it was Izuku's turn, he stepped forward calmly, had his hand hover over the button for a moment, and glanced back at his mother in the stands and at his friend Merciless, who smirked back. He pressed the button, and amid a flash and a hum he was gone. The battle royale had officially begun. Izuku landed softly on damp earth near the forest edge by a rocky stream. Steam rising faintly from his shoulders. Tall trees swayed gently and a narrow stream trickled nearby. He stood up and scanned the terrain, his eye glowing red briefly as he checked for movement. There were no signs of anyone, only birdsong and rustling branches. Izuku told himself to move. Izumi found herself in an overgrown ruin, standing in a crumbled stone courtyard with vines curling around broken pillars and moss underfoot. She took a slow breath to calm her nerves, noted that the walls could provide cover and height for escape routes, pulled her sleeves tighter, and began to move with light, careful steps. She reminded herself that she would catch up with Izuku. Momo appeared on a rocky ledge overlooking a wide valley, wind tugging at her hair and her tablet buzzing faintly. She scanned the terrain for rivers, trees, and distant ruins, marked coordinates and ambush zones on her tablet, and reported that no one was nearby. She created a small drone from her belt pouch and sent it into the sky to scan the area, focusing on making her actions efficient. Bakugo landed with a thud in a scorched crater zone where the ground was cracked and blackened. He grinned, noting that the heat and open ground meant no hiding spots, just him and whoever showed up. He sparked the palms of his hands and dared anyone to come. Shoto stood at the edge of a frozen riverbank with mist curling around his feet. The air was cold and quiet. He touched the ice, felt its smooth, solid texture, and noted that the place suited him. He began walking along the river in silence, his left side glowing faintly with heat to keep frost from clinging to his skin. He moved calmly and calculatedly, ready. Present Mike announced excitedly over the stadium speakers that the battle royale was underway and that encounters were already happening across the field. He described an early match between Kirishima and Tetsu as a test of fists and grit. Izawa, seated beside him, observed calmly that the match would come down to stamina. Meanwhile, Kirishima landed with a roll in a rocky canyon near the battlefield's center and brushed dust off his arms. Moments later, a loud thud echoed nearby. Tetsu emerged from behind a boulder, his body gleaming with iron. He grinned and pointed out that it looked like a steel showdown. Kirishima cracked his knuckles and agreed that they were thinking the same thing. They charged at each other with matching roars, fists colliding mid-air with a metallic clang. Sparks flew as hardened skin met iron, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Kirishima ducked a punch and countered with a shoulder slam, but Tetsu held firm, grabbing Kirishima's arm and swinging him into a rock wall. Kirishima acknowledged the hit with a grin and insisted he was only getting started. Kirishima hardened his entire body, a faint red glow appearing, and launched a flurry of punches. Tetsu blocked most, but one slipped through and knocked him back. Both boys panted, bruised but smiling. Tetsu suggested finishing the match like real competitors, and Kirishima agreed. They charged one last time. The screen blinked, and Kirishima emerged victorious, wrapping white tape around his friend with a respectful nod. A speaker announced that Tetsu from Class 1B had been eliminated. Present Mike praised the sportsmanship, noting that Kirishima took the win while the two remained good friends. Aizawa observed quietly, his expression unreadable. In a shadowy forest zone, Kaminari tiptoed through the underbrush with sparks flickering around his fingers. Suddenly, the shadows shifted and Kurwaro melted out of a tree trunk, commenting that the brightness was unpleasant. Kaminari reacted with surprise at the eerie entrance. Kurwaro lunged, slipping through shadows like smoke. Kaminari fired a burst of electricity that lit up the forest, but Kurwaro vanished again. Kurwaro warned him that one could not hit what could not be seen. Kaminari spun and unleashed a wide-range shockwave that forced Kurwaro out of hiding by clearing the immediate area of cover. Kaminari seized the opportunity and charged forward. Kurwaro tried to retreat into a shadow, but Kaminari used a larger electric burst that overwhelmed Kurwaro's senses and flooded the clearing with light, preventing him from slipping back into the darkness. With a quick sprint, Kaminari tackled him and wrapped tape around his arm. Kaminari apologized to the shadowy opponent with a grin and noted that bright ideas had won the day. A speaker announced that Shurhei Kurwaro from Class 1B had been eliminated. Present Mike called it a shocking strategy and praised Kaminari's timing. Aizawa allowed a small sigh and remarked that this time Kaminari had not caused lasting harm, which was progress. Near a ruined amphitheater, Jairu and Shoji moved cautiously. They had met earlier and formed a duo to get through the round together. A massive boom echoed through the air, knocking them off their feet. Manga Fukudashi stood atop a broken column, producing a cartoonish booming effect. Jairu noted that it was a sound battle and prepared her gear. She plugged her jacks into the ground and sent a sonic wave through the ruins. Manga countered with an explosive burst that shook the earth. Shoji shielded Jairu with his arms and extended a tentacle to grab Manga's ankle. Manga attempted to upset their footing, causing Shoji to lose his grip and slide backward. Jairu narrowed her eyes and retaliated with a high-frequency blast that disrupted Manga's balance. Shoji lunged again, this time catching Manga's wrist and pinning him. Jairu wrapped tape around him gently. Shoji praised the teamwork, and Jairu returned the compliment with a smile. A speaker announced that Manga Fukudashi from Class 1B had been eliminated. Present Mike celebrated the teamwork of Jairu and Shoji, calling it a triumph of sound and strength. Aizawa glanced at the screen and noted that Jairu's precision was improving. In a damp, mossy glade, Mina skated across the ground on acid slides, laughing as she dodged tiny mushrooms popping up around her. Kinoko Komori stood calmly with her hands raised and suggested that Mina would trip eventually. Mina giggled and dismissed the mushrooms as irrelevant to her goal. Spores filled the air and Mina coughed as her vision blurred slightly. Kinoko indicated that they were sleep spores. Mina grinned through the haze and prepared a countermeasure. She sprayed a wide arc of acid that cleared the spores and melted a path toward Kinoko. The mushroom girl tried to retreat, but Mina slid in quickly and wrapped tape around her, winking as she kept blinking to stay awake. Mina apologized to Kinoko for being too slippery. A speaker announced that Kinoko Komori from Class 1B had been eliminated. Present Mike proclaimed Mina's victory with enthusiasm, and Aizawa nodded approvingly that Mina was learning to control the battlefield. Near a crumbling bridge, Shiro swung from pillar to pillar, tape flying like ribbons. Juzo Hananuki softened the ground below, turning it into a sticky sludge and predicting that Shiro would fall eventually. Shiro grinned and insisted that he would keep swinging. He launched tape at a nearby tree, flipped midair, and dodged a softened beam. Hananuki attempted to collapse the bridge, but Shiro wrapped tape around a support beam and slingshot himself forward, tagging Hananuki midair and wrapping tape around him. Shiro remarked that sticky situations were his specialty. A speaker announced that Juzo Hananuki from Class 1B had been eliminated. Present Mike praised Shiro's smooth tape work. Present Mike leaned back and grinned as the recent encounters concluded, commenting that the Battle Royale had delivered strategy, surprises, and impressive quirks. Aizawa folded his arms and said he wanted to see how the top 5 handled the next phase, where things would get interesting. The trees rustled overhead, casting dappled shadows across the mossy ground. In a quiet clearing, 5 students from Class 1B stood in a loose circle with serious expressions. Monoma stood at the center with his arms folded dramatically and a confident smirk. He began by pointing out that Class 1A was again dominating the top ranks and suggested that they could change that. Kendo raised an eyebrow at Monoma's theatrical tone. He insisted that they listen to the plan. Monoma argued that they were not just there to survive but to prove themselves by taking down the top 5 from Class 1A one by one in a clean, strategic way. Tagaru Kamakiri sharpened his claws against a rock and agreed that he was ready for a real fight. Pony Tsunotori looked uncertain and wondered if the plan was unfair. Monoma reassured the group that it was tactical and that their strength lay in strategy. Kendo crossed her arms and clarified that she did not care about stealing the spotlight, but she did agree that it was time to show what Class 1B could do. If they worked together, she said, they could make a real impact. Monoma clapped his hands and proposed that they vote on the plan. The group debated who to target first. Monoma pulled out a small tablet that displayed the top 5 rankings: Izuku Shurnan, Izumi Yagi, Shoto Todoroki, Katsuki Bakugo, and Momo Yaoyorozu. Each student voiced their choice, and the result was decided seconds later. The target would be Izuku, receiving 5 votes. Monoma grinned and said that the golden boy himself had taken first place and they should knock him off his pedestal. Kendo nodded calmly and pointed out that he was fast, incredibly strong, smart, and unpredictable, so they would need to coordinate carefully. Reiko Yanagi levitated a few stones and volunteered to keep him distracted from above. Monoma's eyes gleamed as he declared that this plan was perfect and that they would show everyone what Class 1B was made of. Kendo reminded them to avoid recklessness and showboating, insisting they execute the plan cleanly and together. The group agreed. Present Mike announced with electric enthusiasm that Class 1B appeared to be setting up a coordinated strike, calling the tactical ambush exciting. Aizawa glanced at the screen and observed that if they pulled it off it would be impressive, but that Izuku would not be easy to corner. The forest was unnaturally quiet. Izuku walked along a narrow stream with a calm expression and a relaxed pace, as if on a casual stroll rather than in the middle of a survival exercise. He scanned the area and noted that 5 signatures were surrounding him. He stopped and spoke into the empty woods, telling whoever was out there that they did not have to keep hiding. The branches above stirred, the shadows shifted, and Class 1B struck. Yanagi sent stones, branches, and debris flying toward Izuku from all directions. Pony launched twin horn projectiles while Kamakiri burst from the underbrush with blades extended. Kendo charged from the left with a massive, swollen fist ready to strike. Monoma hung back with a smug expression and asserted that their opponent was cornered. Izuku assessed the attack as predictable. He moved in a blur, twisting just enough for the flying stones to miss, then reached up to intercept Pony's horn mid-flight and disarm it. Steam rose around his arm as he neutralized the projectile and tossed it aside. Kamakiri's blade came down, but Izuku sidestepped with practiced ease, caught Kamakiri's wrist, and flipped him over his shoulder so he landed hard but uninjured on the ground. Kendo's fist smashed into the ground, cracking the earth and scattering dirt, but Izuku was already gone and reappeared at her side. He noted that she had been telegraphing her moves, then used a surge of strength to shove her backward. She stumbled and skidded before regaining her footing. Yanagi tightened her control over the levitating debris to try to pin him, but Izuku stomped the ground and sent an outward shockwave that scattered the floating projectiles. He commented that gravitational tricks would not save them if their control wavered. The ambushers' breathing grew heavy as they realized their trap had unraveled in seconds. Monoma's smirk faltered and he warned not to get cocky, insisting they were not finished. Izuku replied that they already were finished. He vanished and closed the gap in an instant, stopping a fist inches from Monoma's chest with pressure that forced Monoma to step back. Izuku admonished Monoma for hunting without understanding the predator he had cornered. Kamakiri staggered up and charged again, but Izuku reacted with a quick heel strike that sent him reeling. Kendo tried once more, swelling her arm, but Izuku moved past the blow and delivered a precise palm strike that sent her into a tree. Yanagi's hands trembled as she tried to lift more stones, but Izuku was already by her side and gently lowered her hands, telling her to sit this one out. Tape appeared around her arms a moment later to mark her eliminated status. Monoma retreated step by step, his bravado giving way to fear as he stammered that this did not make Izuku special. Izuku cut him off, insisting that luck had nothing to do with it, and quickly wrapped tape around Monoma as well. The stadium announcer then declared that Nito Monoma, Yanagi Reiko, Pony Tsunatori, Taguru Kamakiri, and Itsuka Kendo from Class 1B had been eliminated. Present Mike nearly jumped out of his chair, loudly marveling that Izuku had taken down 5 students in a single engagement and praising the footwork and precision on display. Aizawa watched with narrowed eyes and remarked that Izuku had not even been serious. Back in the clearing, Izuku stood tall, wrapped the tape neatly and tossed it aside. His breathing was steady and his expression calm. He looked toward the horizon and reflected that if this was the best ambush they could muster, the rest of the round would be boring. He began to leave, his boots crunching on the damp earth, but a figure landed lightly in front of him. Momo Yaoyorozu arrived holding a tablet and a gleaming staff, her breathing heavy from the sprint. She approached with a firm, conflicted expression and apologized, stating that he was too much of a threat to ignore. Izuku glanced at her staff and then at her, remaining calm and unreadable. Another voice came from behind him as Izumi Midoriya stepped from the shadows, sleeves tight and stance tense. She offered a small, apologetic smile and explained that if they did not deal with Izuku now, none of them would stand a chance in the later rounds. Izuku took both of them in without moving into a defensive stance and acknowledged that they had decided to team up. Momo assumed a defensive grip on her staff. Izumi raised her fists, emerald eyes sharp, and insisted that it was the only logical and best choice. Momo nodded in agreement, and Izuku allowed a faint smirk to tug at his lips as he questioned whether numbers made a difference. The words hung heavy in the air. Momo's grip on her staff tightened and Izumi took a step forward, ready to act. Before either could strike, a sudden frost raced across the ground, ice creeping along the moss and a cold mist spreading through the clearing until the stream froze. Shoto Todoroki entered the scene, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on Izuku, his expression calm but edged with intensity. Shoto warned that this was not just Izuku's fight anymore and that anyone aiming for the top would have to go through him as well. Izumi's eyes widened and Momo bit her lip. Izuku did not flinch. He noted that Shoto had come too. Tension thickened in the clearing, 3 against 1. The tension shattered when an explosion rocked through the trees, sending branches splintering and leaves scattering in a fiery shockwave. Bakugo Katsuki burst into the clearing, palms sparking and a savage grin on his face. He charged at Izuku with a roaring accusation that he had known all along who was responsible and vowed to blast him out of the arena. Now they were arrayed across the clearing, Momo with her staff raised, Izumi with fists clenched, Shoto with frost crawling along his boots, Bakugo with palms crackling, and Izuku standing calm in the center, his eyes glowing faint red. Izuku scanned each of them slowly and then, rolling his shoulders as faint steam hissed from him, observed that it was 4 against 1. He accepted that with a single word of approval and suggested that perhaps this would not be so boring after all. Power radiated from him and the clearing seemed seconds away from erupting. Suddenly Izuku's aura burst outward like a shockwave. Steam exploded from his body in violent bursts, the trees shuddered and leaves scattered, and hairline cracks spiderwebbed across the soil beneath them. The force settled over the 4 like a weight, stifling their movements and stealing their breath. For a terrifying instant none of them could even twitch. Izuku remained rooted in place, shoulders relaxed, eyes faintly red as steam coiled and hissed around him. Then, for a heartbeat, the air around him warped and a massive shadow rose. Jagged wings unfurled and a serpentine head craned upward, the silhouette of a dragon looming behind him. The vision vanished almost as soon as it appeared, but it was enough. Momo's eyes widened and her staff trembled. Izumi stared with her pulse racing, unable to fully process what she had seen. Shoto's usual composure cracked, his breath coming in shaky clouds. Even Bakugo, who rarely held back, did not shout. His jaw tightened and sweat beaded on his temple as his palms sparked more violently. Each of them registered the same unsettling impression. Izuku let his gaze travel slowly across them and remarked that their bodies already understood what their minds struggled to accept. He stepped forward and the ground split beneath his boot. He told them plainly that they were standing against someone they could not beat. The aura flared and the dragon's shadow flickered one last time before dissolving into steam. Their paralysis broke. They each gulped air as if resurfacing. Izuku tilted his head and, with a soft, almost mocking tone, asked whether they still wanted to fight. The forest held its breath, all eyes on the boy who stood like a calm storm with a dragon in his shadow. Above the arena, a massive holographic screen showed the clearing. The feed displayed the same tableau. Izuku in the center and the 4 students frozen in tense poses. Present Mike leaned forward, shades glinting, and remarked that the stare down was odd since no one was making the first move and it was especially strange to see Bakugo not charging forward. Midnight tilted her head and wondered why they appeared frozen. Cementos crossed his arms and suggested they might be waiting for an opening, strategizing. Aizawa's gaze, however, remained fixed on Izuku with a sharper attention than the others. He did not accept the easy explanations and, in a low, almost inaudible mutter, asked what Izuku was hiding. Back in the clearing, Izuku's aura still pressed against the air, heavy and suffocating. Each of the 4 felt the instinct to flee, to give up, but none of them moved. Bakugo snarled and forced his muscles to obey, sparks crackling from his palms as he insisted he was not afraid and vowed to strip the smugness from Izuku's face. Shoto calmed his breath and reminded himself that control mattered as much as power, deciding he would not back down. Momo steadied her grip on her staff, her knees trembling but her resolve solid. She pledged to fight with everything she had even if she could not match Izuku's presence. Izumi clenched her fists and, despite her racing pulse, insisted that Izuku might be strong but he was not invincible. Izuku watched them and allowed the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, an acknowledgement rather than mockery. He noted that they had chosen to stand. He lowered his stance slightly, the aura curling around him like coiled flame, and approved of their decision. The air crackled and the moment stretched thin as the forest held its breath once more. They were about to move. Light exploded into the clearing as combat hung on a knife edge. Then a robotic speaker announced across the arena that the battle royale had ended and that 16 participants remained. All others had been eliminated. The sound rolled through the trees like thunder and everyone froze from shock. Izuku straightened slowly, his aura dissipating like mist. He exhaled, his glowing eye dimming, and he murmured that he had been saved by the bell. Bakugo's snarl turned into a frustrated roar as he protested that they had only just been getting started. Shoto returned to his calm neutrality with the faintest trace of tension still in his shoulders. Momo lowered her staff, relief and disappointment mingling in her expression. Izumi unclenched her fists but kept her gaze locked on Izuku. The clearing fell silent again, not from fear this time but because the round had ended. Light engulfed the forest clearing, and before anyone could act the 16 remaining students found themselves standing in the center of the massive stadium. The cheers of tens of thousands crashed down like a wave. The sudden shift from the quiet, tense forest to the roaring crowd was dizzying. Midnight strode forward under the spotlights, microphone twirling in one hand and a radiant smile on her face. She announced that the battle royale was over and congratulated the 16 surviving contenders. The crowd erupted, names and applause echoing around the arena. Midnight gestured at the group and warned them not to get comfortable before declaring that the final round had arrived. She explained that the event would be a classic one-on-one tournament. The arena shook with approval. Among the students, Izuku stood calmly with his aura gone, the lingering heat of it remembered by those who had faced him. Bakugo growled under his breath, fists clenched. Shoto watched with his usual unreadable expression. Momo and Izumi kept stealing side glances at Izuku when they thought he wasn't looking. Hitoshi Shinso approached with his hands in his pockets and told Izuku that he had known he would make it through. Izuku smirked and indicated that Shinso should already know him. They bumped fists in a quiet, friendly gesture that contrasted with the roaring crowd. Shinso joked dryly that the real fun was about to start and wondered if they would be paired early. Izuku said it did not matter when and that he would not hold back. Shinso returned the sentiment. Midnight drew attention back to the main stage and signaled to the enormous digital screens suspended above the arena. 16 empty slots appeared in a tournament bracket, and then the names of the students began to spin across the screen, snapping into positions one by one. Gasps and cheers rose from the crowd as pairings formed. The students stared up, tension thick in the air, waiting to see who fate would set against them. The first match locked in as Hitoshi Shinso versus Mina Ishido. Present Mike leaned into his own microphone and announced the surprising clash between Shinso, the mind manipulator, and Ishido, the agile acid user, framing it as brains versus adaptability. Shinso sighed and accepted that he was on stage first. Izuku cautioned Shinso not to underestimate Ishido, and Shinso replied that he never did. The second pairing became Momo Yaoyorozu versus Denki Kaminari. The crowd reacted with a mix of sympathy and cheer for Kaminari, who blanched at the prospect of facing Momo. Momo adjusted her grip on her staff and affirmed that she would do her best. Kaminari groaned and muttered that he felt doomed. The third match paired Izumi Yagi with Eijiro Kirishima. Kirishima pumped his fist and celebrated the strong contest ahead, while Izumi smiled nervously but with excitement and said she would see how tough he truly was. Kirishima grinned and declared that he would test how much she could endure. Match 4 locked in as Shoto Todoroki versus Mizo Shoji. The crowd reacted with surprise. Shoji crossed his many arms calmly and watched the board with an unreadable expression. Present Mike described the bout as a wild clash between elemental precision and multi-armed versatility. Shoto remained focused on the bracket with his usual composure. The fifth match set Katsuki Bakugo against Fumikage Tokoyami, prompting a stadium-wide roar. Midnight commented that it would be a dark and fiery clash. Bakugo grinned fiercely and vowed that the bird-like opponent would go down hard. Tokoyami let his shadow flare and calmly responded that darkness thrived against fire. The tension between them crackled. The sixth pairing matched Achiko Uraraka with Tenya Ida. Achiko blinked in surprise at facing Ida. Ida adjusted his glasses and urged her not to hold back while promising that he would not hold back either. She clenched her fists and nodded in agreement. The seventh match paired Mei Hatsum and Rikido Sato. The crowd gave a more subdued cheer. Sato looked tense but ready while Mei grinned, clearly excited by the opportunity. The final match in the bracket locked with a chime. Izuku Shernan versus Kyoka Jiro. The stadium exploded into frenzy. Jiro's eyes widened and her earjacks twitched at the announcement while many in the crowd cheered her name wildly. Others murmured in awe at Izuku's calm figure. Present Mike described the closing match as the showdown between Shernan, the powerhouse who had dominated the battle royale, and Jiro, the sound specialist with nerves of steel, calling it the underdog clash everyone loved to see. Midnight snapped her whip and announced that the 16 finalists were set. She explained that after a 1-hour break the students would return to the arena one by one for duels that would test their quirks, will, cunning, and hearts. The screen flashed and the bracket locked in place for all to see. Izuku, however, did not look at the screen. He stared at empty space, eyes widening. Shinso asked if Izuku was all right. Izuku muttered to himself as he stared at the system window that had just appeared. A system window had appeared announcing an emergency quest, the invasion by the demons. The objective was to intercept and defeat the 2 demon nobles and their army. Before they invaded Earth. Enemies defeated, 02, Time until the invasion. 4:59. Marcellus rubbed his chin and considered the news. He, Izuku, and Izuku's mother Sonia had met in a quiet corner during the 5-minute break before the one-on-one matches. As soon as the break began, Izuku had told them everything about the emergency quest he had received. Marcellus wondered aloud why the demon nobles were making a move now. He explained that Hell had always remained neutral in the cosmic war, observing but not participating, and that the nobles' sudden aggression might mean they were finally choosing to become active players. Izuku asked how strong a demon noble might be, eyes flashing red for an instant. Marcellus admitted he had no first-hand experience. He only knew rumors that suggested 2 of them could probably be taken down, but that the task would be difficult. Izuku decided he would go. Sonia began to protest and asked him to be careful. Tears gathered in her eyes. Izuku softened at his mother's worry and hugged her, reassuring her that she did not need to worry about him and promising to make anyone who threatened Earth regret their choices. His eyes glowed red as he vowed to protect their world. Marcellus smirked, praised his resolve, patted his shoulder, and urged him to show the power of the dragons. Izuku opened his system and selected the option to teleport to the enemy's location. Sonia and Marcellus heard his final choice before he vanished. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in an unfamiliar but strangely beautiful place that nonetheless felt dangerous. His senses picked up thousands of presences nearby, the demon nobles and their army. He murmured that the war was beginning and leapt into the sky, the force of his jump cracking the ground beneath him. At the demon encampment, a few of the demons were relaxed and noisy, drinking and trading stories about Earth. Conversation halted when someone noticed a sound approaching from the air. Before they could react, something crashed nearby with tremendous force, creating a huge crater and scattering many of the demons. When the dust settled, Izuku stood at the impact site, eyes glowing red and a confident smirk on his face. Izuku issued a sharp challenge and then moved with blinding speed. He struck with precise, swift maneuvers, overwhelming several demons and putting them out of the fight without any graphic detail. One demon stumbled back in shock, overwhelmed and forced to retreat. Another lunged from the shadows with a clawed attack, but Izuku intercepted the move, immobilized the attacker, and sent it tumbling away. The skirmish was fierce but stylized. The demons themselves were left bewildered, unsure which of them was the greater hellish threat. From the distance, Verkazel sneered and laughed as his voice cut through the shattered air. Nixareth stepped forward with a cruel grin, scolding Izuku for allowing them time to recover and making it clear that mercy was not something they gave to enemies. Verkazel slammed a palm to his chest and a deep glow pulsed out from within him like the heartbeat of chaos. He warned that they were going all out and that they would make Izuku suffer. Nixareth began to chant, dark energy gathering and thickening the air. The 2 demon lords shouted in unison command and a blinding light erupted, swallowing the battlefield. When the light faded, Verkazel and Nixareth stood transformed, monstrous and warped by demonic power. Horns spiraled from their skulls, shadowy wings unfurled behind them, and their eyes burned with malevolent fury. The space around them seemed to tremble, reality itself recoiled from their presence. Izuku tightened his grip on his sword. The real battle had begun. A glowing interface materialized before him and identified the foes. Verkazel, Demon Lord of Chaos, level 304. Nixareth, Demon Lord of Void, level. Izuku thought that taking them down in his base form would not be easy and prepared himself for the challenge ahead. Verkazel sneered, noting that the cat had gotten the other's tongue. Nixareth added that the poor dragon seemed to realize he was outmatched, and both of them laughed with cruel delight. Their laughter faltered when Izuku smirked. He observed calmly that 2 fools were laughing in the face of death and warned that those close to dying sometimes lost their grip on reality. His voice was cold and final. The demon lord's expressions twisted with rage. Verkazel roared that he would kill him and launched himself off the ground with explosive force, his fist surging toward Izuku and the air itself fracturing under the strike. Izuku raised his hand and caught the punch midair, his palm absorbing the force with ease. Verkazel's eyes widened in disbelief before he clicked his tongue and leapt backward. Izuku stood with crimson eyes glowing quietly as he summoned his sword, its blade pulsing with radiant mana. With a subtle lift of his weapon, he vanished in a blur of speed, the ground shattering beneath him as he launched at the demon lords. Varkazel and Nixareth barely evaded the strike, staring at the devastation a deep fissure carved into the earth, still humming with residual energy. Varkazel summoned chains that whipped through the air toward Izuku, but Izuku's blade sliced them effortlessly and the fragments clattered harmlessly to the ground. Nixareth retaliated with a massive beam of fire that melted the terrain in its path. Izuku remained composed, raising his sword and cleaving through the inferno with a single graceful strike, dispersing the flames like mist. Izuku warned that if they did not give it their all, they would die. Nixareth's eyes snapped wide as Izuku's voice echoed beside him, too close, and he spun instinctively just in time to see Izuku's blade flash toward him. Nixareth twisted away and summoned a massive, mana-infused axe that pulsed with dark energy. With a roar he lunged, unleashing a flurry of brutal strikes. Izuku met each blow with calm precision, his sword dancing through the air like liquid fire. His instincts screamed and he vaulted upward, narrowly avoiding a deadly slash that cut through the space he just occupied. Landing several meters back, he faced the two demon lords, both armed and ready, their eyes locked on him with murderous intent. Izuku smirked and surged forward, clashing with both of them at once. His movements blurred, each strike laced with overwhelming speed and power, sending shockwaves rippling across the planet's surface. The demon lords were no mere opponents. Their combined strength pushed back fiercely. Their strikes nearly grazed Izuku as the battle escalated into a storm of raw force and relentless fury. After several grueling minutes, the strain began to show. Izuku's breaths grew heavier and his movements slowed as he struggled to fend off the onslaught, dodging spells, deflecting chains, and parrying relentless strikes. Sensing the shift, the demon lords pressed harder, their attacks growing fiercer, faster, and more unforgiving. Izuku leapt backward to carve space between them as dust and mana swirled around his feet. Nixareth sneered and taunted him, but Izuku did not answer. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered the name of a technique to himself. The change was instant. A colossal wave of power erupted from Izuku, blasting outward like a shockwave and hurling debris and the demon lord's back with sheer force. The ground trembled beneath him. Twin wings unfurled from his back while a long, scaled tail formed behind him. Crimson scales shimmered across his arms as a red aura enveloped his body like living flame. Varkazel stared in disbelief and muttered that Izuku could do that too. Nixareth's expression darkened and he warned that they needed to end it now or they would not survive. Varkazel nodded and snapped his fingers. The sky lit up with hundreds of glowing magic circles and a barrage of mana beams rained down toward Izuku like a storm. Izuku opened his eyes, now glowing with draconic fury. He vanished without sound or flash, leaving the demon lords frozen and tense, aware that something was coming but unable to see it. Before they could react, Izuku's sword cut through the air and through them. They were thrown back, battered and stunned by the force of the strike. Izuku appeared in front of Varkazel, who was now kneeling and coughing, visibly hurt. Varkazel questioned what had happened and had expected to be able to torture him. Izuku's fist slammed into Varkazel's stomach with such force that the demon lord was sent flying across the sky, disappearing over the horizon. Nixareth attempted a strike from behind, his punch glowing with dark mana, but Izuku turned, blocked it with one hand, and kicked Nixareth in the chin. The kick sent him into the air, spinning before he crashed back to the ground. Nixareth muttered that Izuku was moving too fast to track as he rose, and his wounds began to heal in a flash of dark light. Varkazel landed nearby and regenerated rapidly. Varkazel said he would cast a temporal dampening field to slow everything around Izuku, and Nixareth agreed to strike once the field was in place. Varkazel raised his hand and a shimmering sphere of warped magic snapped into place around Izuku, the air inside twisting unnaturally and distorting light and sound. Izuku's eyes darted around as he tested the unfamiliar barrier. Varkazel signaled the moment to attack, and Nixareth summoned a massive magic circle above that pulsed with ominous energy. Izuku launched himself toward Nixareth, but his body moved as if submerged in molasses, Every motion was sluggish. He realized the spell had reduced his speed to a tiny fraction of its normal pace. With the dampening field at full effect, Nyxaretha's spell reached its peak and a colossal bolt of lightning tore down from the sky, striking Izuku dead on. A raw, agonized scream tore from him as the lightning surged through him with overwhelming force. The pain was like nothing he had felt before, and his vision blurred while his body trembled. Deep within, something refused to break. He forced himself upright, determined not to fall, and his cry shifted from pain into pure fury. Of resolve. Nyxareth shouted in frustration, asking why his target would not fall as lightning continued to pour from the sky. The spell was relentless and the drain on his mana was obvious. His hands trembled and his breath grew shallow. Varkazel clenched his jaw and focused on Izuku, who still stood beneath the storm, battered but unbroken. Varkazel appeared beside Nyxareth and declared that this was their last chance and he would not let it slip away. He placed a firm hand on Nyxaretha's shoulder and transferred raw mana to him, urging him to take the power, keep the spell going and finish the fight. Nyxareth accepted, and the renewed energy reignited the storm above. Izuku staggered under the assault, his body scorched and his nerves screaming. He wondered if it would ever stop, feeling that he could barely hold on and fearing he might lose consciousness. He bit down the pain and refused to cry out. His vision blurred and his muscles threatened to lock, but his will endured. He reminded himself that he could not fall here, not after the threats to Earth, his mother, and his friends. That resolve flared into fury. A blinding surge of crimson aura exploded from him like a shockwave. The ground fractured beneath his feet and space itself rippled under the force of his anger. The air grew heavy and electric as his power awakened, raw and untamed. Even Nyxareth and Varkazel dropped to their knees beneath the crushing pressure. Varkazel could scarcely catch his breath, astonished by an aura unlike anything he had felt before and struggling to stay conscious. The battlefield trembled under Izuku's overwhelming presence. Nyxareth panicked, unable to move, to summon a spell, or to flee. Every part of him resisted as if the world itself held him down. Both demon lords stared at Izuku, whose crimson aura surged like living flame and warped the battlefield. In that moment, they realized they were facing a force of nature. A sudden inner shift altered Izuku's state. Wrathborn Ascension activated, amplifying his strength in proportion to his fury. He temporarily ascended to the rank of legendary dragon, gaining an elemental control at an intermediate level. The adaptation skill forced the Dracuous dragon core to pour power into him until the fury subsided. As the final crackle of lightning faded, Izuku rose from one knee. His eyes glowed a pure, unrelenting red, not merely with rage but with something deeper and primeval. With a simple motion his sword returned, but it had changed, darker and pulsing with a heavy aura that bent the air around it. Nyxareth screamed as agony tore through him when Izuku's blade struck. The blade plunged into him, and Nyxareth fell, wounded and collapsing to the ground, barely alive. He coughed and looked up, stunned by the certainty of defeat reflected in Izuku's cold, unflinching gaze. Izuku withdrew the blade and stepped back. Nyxaretha's body hit the earth and lay still. Varkazel watched, frozen and horrified, as his ally writhed and failed to recover. Izuku advanced, his resolve merciless. In a swift exchange the demon lord suffered a grievous wound that left him incapacitated. He crumpled to his knees as his regeneration faltered and his strength ebbed. Izuku drove the sword home once more. When he pulled it free, Varkazel's body collapsed beside Nyxaretha's. Both demon lords were defeated, their power shattered. Izuku stood among the quiet aftermath, his aura flickering like embers. But his restraint had only held by a thread, and with the battle's end that last tether broke. Trembling not from exhaustion but from the force consuming him, he lifted his head and unleashed a roar that echoed like a ripping in reality. Mountains shuddered, seas responded, and the sky itself seemed to fracture under the sound. His breath became a single, focused release. A beam of destructive energy erupted from him, sweeping across the land with unstoppable force. In its path the battlefield and the remnants of his enemies were erased in an instant. The wave of power cleaved through the world, reshaping continents and scattering nearby celestial bodies. Stars flickered and distant moons fractured as the scope of his unleashed power became painfully clear. Space itself trembled. Izuku had become a force of overwhelming power. In his full dragon form, he rampaged through the cosmos, his breath of destruction carving through asteroids, satellites, and distant worlds until whole planets were reduced to drifting debris. He soared through space with colossal wings unfurled and his body radiating an almost godlike energy. Nearby celestial bodies collapsed under the intensity of his onslaught. Just as he opened his mouth to unleash another breath, a massive beam of energy struck him from afar, blinding and precise. The impact sent Izuku hurtling backward, smashing into a meteor with explosive force and scattering fragments into the void. For the first time in his rampage, Izuku was stopped. The elder dragon, floating before him, was colossal and ancient. Its scales had faded with age, but its presence carried the weight of countless years. The elder dragon remarked that a hatchling legendary dragon was throwing a tantrum in the middle of nowhere and taunted Izuku, claiming to have crushed brats long before they learned to roar and challenging him to show his fury. Izuku's eyes snapped upward, burning with fury. His wings flared wide and his aura crackled like a storm barely contained. The void around them trembled as the battle between legends began. Another planet shattered into a cascade of blazing fragments as the clash tore across the cosmos. From a distant perspective, Izuku Shurnon rose, his body blazing with divine radiance as he reached the temporary rank of legendary dragon. Opposite him hovered the unknown dragon, cloaked in an ancient, unfathomable aura, and in that moment the older being overwhelmed Izuku with raw, controlled power. Izuku lunged forward with a colossal claw wreathed in molten energy, aiming a devastating strike. The unknown dragon caught the blow with effortless strength and then, with a movement that reverberated through the vacuum, struck Izuku in return. The impact sent Izuku spiraling through an asteroid belt before he slammed into a massive rock that cracked on contact. Despite the assault, Izuku shook off the shock. His scales glimmered crimson with anger and pride, and his roar rolled through the cosmos, so loud that distant suns seemed to shiver. He unleashed his ultimate technique, the breath of destruction, a surge of annihilating energy bright enough to make nearby systems flare. The unknown dragon's eyes widened only slightly before he twisted aside, letting the beam pass through a stretch of space and leave it empty and changed. The unknown dragon observed that Izuku's ultimate was indeed dangerous, then studied him with eyes that glowed a deep violet, as if judging the promise of a young life. He reflected that a dragon so young could already display such power and, shifting form, began to change. Scales gave way to flesh and robes of celestial silk as he assumed a human-like aspect that still exuded the authority of a living god. In that form he floated before Izuku and spoke of duty to teach as his elder. With a casual raise of his hand, the unknown dragon distorted the surrounding space. He produced a searing beam of energy from his fingertip that cut across the void like a divine blade, dimming distant stars as it passed. Izuku's instincts screamed danger. Even in his berserk state, he jerked his massive head aside just as the beam grazed him and struck a nearby asteroid instead. The resulting explosion consumed the field of rocks in a flash of light that rivaled a supernova and sent Izuku hurtling through debris again. The unknown dragon, calm and chilling, noted that even that display did not break Izuku's resolve and asked if he still planned to fight. Izuku answered with a low, defiant growl. His scales shimmered with a crimson aura and his pupils burned red as he prepared himself. The elder noted that most dragons, even berserk ones, fled when they sensed his power, but Izuku was different. He extended his arm and formed an orb of energy in his palm that swelled until it was larger than a moon. He commented that this part of the universe was empty, allowing him to strike without restraint, and then slammed the orb downward. The resulting blast rocked star systems. Planets fractured, comets evaporated, and the void itself flared in overwhelming light. When the light faded, the unknown dragon's expression tightened as he observed that Izuku still survived sprawled amid cosmic dust, battered but breathing. His regenerative energy moved quickly to mend him, and his aura flared once more. The elder judged that Izuku was preparing something desperate. He watched as Izuku began to gather vast energy into his jaws for another breath of destruction, one so immense that the fabric of space seemed to bend around it. The unknown dragon sighed at the recklessness and, with a subtle motion, used his gravitational command. Dozens of celestial bodies were tugged from their orbits and hurled together, colliding into Izuku and trapping him in a swirling storm of planetary fragments and radiant dust. The breath of destruction fizzled out before it could be released. A brief calm followed the collision as the two legends faced each other across the changed, silent space. The system announced that the players' health had reached a critical level, that berserk mode was active, and that an emergency teleportation sequence had been initiated. A white light enveloped Izuku's colossal form, shrinking him rapidly until his human body re-emerged, battered and unconscious, barely clinging to life. The unknown dragon watched in silence and chuckled softly. He observed that an automatic retreat protocol had occurred and said he would not stop it, since Izuku had already revealed enough. Turning away with violet eyes glimmering faintly, he stated that they would meet again soon and named him Izuku Shurnan, then vanished into the dark of space, leaving only a drifting silence. Back on Earth, the sun hung low over Izuku's quiet countryside home. In the backyard, Marcellus stood gazing at the sky with his hands in his pockets as the wind tugged at his coat. Beside him, Sonia wore an expression etched with worry and fretted that it had been an entire day and Izuku should have returned by now. Marcellus offered a faint, reassuring smile and insisted that Izuku was fine, that he was tougher than he appeared and that the delay was probably simply interference during teleportation. Even so, doubt flickered behind his calm tone as he noticed the deep worry in Sonia's eyes. He thought silently that she was still scared in the way a mother would be, and his mind drifted to the absence of his own mother. He looked skyward once more, sunlight glinting across his silver hair, when a sudden burst of white light erupted behind them. Both turned sharply and their hearts dropped. Izuku lay motionless in the dirt, his body battered, his scales and traces of damage catching the faint light. Sonia rushed forward and cried out in alarm as Marcellus's expression hardened and his gaze swept over Izuku's condition, noting severe burns, broken limbs, and other serious injuries. Marcellus inferred that Izuku must have fought something far beyond even the demon lords and that someone powerful had intervened. Kneeling beside Sonia, Marcellus hovered a hand over Izuku's chest and declared that he would summon the best healers from his kingdom immediately. Sonia's eyes glistened with tears as she pointed out that Izuku was barely breathing. Blue light flared around Marcellus's palm and his eyes took on the same icy hue. The energy washed over Izuku, stabilizing him and slowing the bleeding. Marcellus admitted that he was no healer but emphasized that he was not helpless. Izuku's breathing steadied slightly and the glow from his wounds began to subside. Marcellus instructed that Izuku be moved to his room so his wounds could be cleaned while healers were contacted. Sonia nodded shakily and, with gentle care, lifted Izuku and carried him inside. Together they laid him upon his bed. At the doorway, Marcellus paused, his eyes gleaming a deep, cold blue, and he promised Sonia that he would find whoever had done this to Izuku. For a moment his body was wreathed in blue light and his aura turned the air around him bitterly cold, the pressure making Sonia shiver. Outside on the rooftop, Marcellus stood with wind howling around him and a glowing magic circle appearing beside his ear as he pressed his fingers to it. He ordered his commander Abisral to send the best healers immediately and to finalize the meeting with the Red Dragon King. He declared that he was done playing nice and warned that if the Red Dragon King wanted war, he would get one. Even through the magic circle, his commander trembled at the tone in his voice. Lowering his hand as the circle dissolved into the night air, Marcellus lifted his gaze to the stars with glacial, unyielding eyes and declared that it was time they remembered why he had been given the title Frost Reaper. His aura flared, the temperature around him plummeted and frost crept across the rooftop. The wind howled as Marcellus turned away, his cold resolve echoing through the night.